She grabbed the collar of his uniform, pulled him close enough that he could smell the fear beneath her perfume, and whispered words that should have ended his career on the spot. "Take me home, or you're fired." Every person in that hotel lobby who heard it assumed the worst. A billionaire CEO using her power like a weapon. A maintenance worker with no choice. But what they didn't see, what nobody saw, were her fingers shaking so badly she could barely hold on to him. This isn't a story about power. This is a story about what happens when the most powerful person in the room is secretly the most desperate. And the man everyone ignored turned out to be the only one paying attention. Drop a comment right now and tell me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. And if you're new here, hit that subscribe button. You do not want to miss where this one goes. The collar of his uniform was still sweat from the burst pipe he'd fixed 3 hours ago. Daniel Brooks stood in the serviced corridor of the Harrington Grand Hotel, his boots leaving faint watermarks on the marble floor, filling out an incident report on a clipboard that had seen better days. His truck was dead in the parking garage battery, probably. Or maybe the alternator finally gave up the same way. Everything else in his life seemed to give up eventually, and he was waiting on a tow that the dispatcher said would take another hour, maybe 90 minutes. "Sorry for the inconvenience, sir." He was 52 years old, and he had been hearing sorry for the inconvenience his whole life. He capped his pen, folded the report, tucked it into his vest pocket. He needed coffee. Bad. The hotel's main bar, the one with the dark wood paneling and the low amber lighting that made everyone look like they belonged in a movie, was technically off-limits to maintenance staff during evening hours. But the kitchen entrance was around the corner, and Maria, the overnight cook, always kept a pot going for the staff who worked the back-of-house shifts. Daniel had known Maria for 6 years. She'd fed him twice on nights when he forgot to eat, and she never asked questions. He pushed through the service door, nodded at the dishwasher he didn't know, and was just rounding the corner toward the kitchen when he stopped. Not because of anything dramatic, not because of fireworks or a voice from heaven. He stopped because something felt wrong. It was the stillness of her. The hotel bar at 9 p.m. on a Thursday was half full. Business travelers nursing scotch. A couple celebrating something. 2 women laughing too loud at the far end. The usual low murmur of expensive quiet. And there, at the corner of the bar, separated from everyone by 3 empty stools on each side, like an invisible wall had been erected around, sat a woman in a Charles suit that probably cost more than Daniel's monthly salary. Her back was straight, her chin was up. Her expression was the kind of controlled, composed, utterly unreadable expression that Daniel had learned to recognize over decades of watching people try very hard to look fine. She was holding a glass of water with both hands, and her hands were shaking. Not a little. She was gripping that glass the way a drowning person grips a rope. Knuckles white, fingers tight, like if she let go, something terrible would happen. Daniel stood there for a moment, told himself it wasn't his business, told himself he had enough of his own problems, told himself that a woman like that, the suit, the posture, the leather portfolio sitting unopened beside her clutch, did not need a maintenance worker from the 4th floor asking if she was okay. He walked to the bar anyway. He sat down 2 stools away. He did not look at her directly. "Rough night?" he said. Casual, like he was talking to the air. She didn't answer immediately. He could see her deciding whether to acknowledge him. He'd worked in enough building, around enough important people to know that look. The slight tightening around the eyes. The assessment. Who is this person and are they a threat? "I'm fine," she said. Her voice was steady, professionally steady, the kind of steady that took practice. "Okay," he flagged down the bartender. "Coffee, please." Black, he didn't push, he didn't press. He just sat there, and she just sat there, and the bar kept humming around them. And Daniel drank his coffee and tried to remember if the tow company had texted him back. 2 minutes passed, maybe 3, then he heard it. A sound so small most people wouldn't have caught it. A sound that didn't belong in that controlled, composed, utterly unreadable picture she was painting. A sharp, quiet intake of breath. The kind that happens when pain comes in a wave. He turned his head. Her free hand was pressed flat against the bar. Her eyes were closed for a second, just a second, before she forced them back open. The composure was cracking, and she was fighting it hard, and losing. Hey, his voice was different now, quieter. Look at me. She turned slowly, and for the first time, she wasn't looking at him like a stranger. She was looking at him like someone who was calculating very quickly whether she could afford to trust a person she'd never met. What's your name? He asked. A pause. Victoria. Victoria. He kept his voice low even. When did it start? When did what start? Whatever is making you hold that glass, like it's the only thing keeping you upright. Something shifted in her face. The mask slipped, just for a moment, and underneath it was pure exhaustion. And something else. Something that looked a lot like fear. The dinner, she said quietly. Business dinner, 2 hours ago. I thought it was the shrimp at first, but... She stopped, pressed her lips together. But what? But I'm on blood pressure medication, and I forgot to take it this morning because I had 4 calls before 7 a.m., and I had 1 glass of wine, which I don't usually. She stopped again, took a breath that wasn't as steady as the last one. I don't drink. I almost never drink. It was a toast. A single toast. Daniel set his coffee cup down slowly. Are you having trouble breathing? No. Then, quieter a little. Any numbness, chest tightness? Who are you? Daniel Brooks. I work maintenance here. And I grew up with a father who had cardiac events. So I know what the beginning of one looks like. And I need you to answer me. Chest tightness? She held his gaze for a long moment. Some, she admitted. Not bad. I think it's the medication interaction. I've had a reaction like this before, years ago. It passed. I have antihistamines in my bag. She glanced at the leather portfolio. I took one 20 minutes ago. I just need to wait it out. You need to wait it out in an emergency room. Absolutely not. The speed of her answer would have surprised him if he hadn't already been watching her. She said it the way a person says something they've already decided, already rehearsed, already committed to beyond any argument. Victoria, I mean it. Her voice dropped even lower, but it was harder now. Iron under the exhaustion. There is a board meeting tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. The most important meeting of my career. If I walk into an ER tonight, it will be on page 6 by midnight. My CFO has a Google alert on my name. He would know before I even finished my intake form. Daniel looked at her. He looked at the trembling hands, the slight discoloration under her eyes. The way her breathing had that careful, measured quality of someone monitoring each breath. What company? He asked. She blinked. What company do you run? A pause, and then, as if the information was physically difficult to release, Sterling Horizon. He knew the name. Everyone who worked in commercial building services in this city knew the name. Sterling Horizon owned half the office towers downtown. They employed close to 12,000 people. He had bid on a maintenance contract with their facilities department 3 years ago, not personally, but through his union, and they had gone with someone else. Daniel Brooks, she said slowly, like she was pulling a file. Wait, you work here, at the Harrington. I work for the building services company that has the contract here, yes. Your company, Tier 1 Building Services. You bid on our facilities contract in 2021. He stared at her. How do you? I reviewed every bid personally. Her jaw tightened slightly. We went with a lower offer. I've since questioned that decision twice. Something in the air between them shifted. She wasn't just any woman in a bar. And she was looking at him now, like he wasn't just any maintenance worker. Your proposal included a section on preventive system monitoring, she said carefully. It was unusually detailed for a facilities bid. It was the most important section. We didn't choose you, I know. Another beat of silence. I still think you made the wrong call, he said. And something happened that Daniel was not expecting. Victoria Sterling laughed. It was brief, barely a sound. More like something that escaped before she could catch it, but it was real. The first real thing he'd seen from her since he sat down. And then she winced, pressing one hand to her chest, and the laugh died. Okay, he made a decision. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to tell me where the antihistamine is in that bag. You're going to take a second, been long enough. And then I'm going to make sure you get home safely. Not because you asked me to. Because you need to. And right now, I'm the only person in this room who knows that. She looked at him with an expression he couldn't entirely read. You'd do that, yes, why? Because someone should. Her jaw worked. He could see the war behind her eyes, the CEO, who controlled everything against the person who was quietly, frighteningly unwell, and sitting alone in a hotel bar, hoping it would resolve itself. She opened the leather portfolio. Her hands were steadier now, the antihistamine working probably, or the focus of conversation pulling some of her attention away from the symptoms. She produced a small prescription bottle. Read the label. Checked her watch. I can take another. Take it. She did. She dry swallowed it with the kind of practiced efficiency that said she'd been managing her own health in transit for a very long time. No water, no ceremony, like a soldier taking a field pill. My car is outside, she said. You're not driving. My driver, is he here? A pause. I told him to take the night off. I was going to call a car. Then I'll take you. Your car. Truck. And it's dead in the garage battery. He paused. We'll get you a car. I'll ride with you. Make sure you're okay when we get there. She stared at him. You're a maintenance worker, she said. Not cruel. Just precise. Like she was stating a fact that didn't add up to the situation. Yes, you don't know me. No, I could be anyone. Victoria Sterling, CEO of Sterling Horizon. Board meeting tomorrow morning at 9. Determined not to let anyone know she needs help. He met her eyes. I know enough. The silence stretched between them for a long 3 seconds. I'm going to stand up now, she said quietly. And I'm going to walk out of this bar like nothing is wrong. And you're going to walk 2 steps behind me. And nobody is going to look twice. Because you're maintenance. And nobody looks at maintenance. He understood what she was asking. He also understood what it cost her to ask it. 2 steps behind, he agreed. She straightened on the stool, closed the portfolio, picked up her clutch, placed both feet on the floor and stood slowly, carefully, with every ounce of composure she had left. And when she turned toward the exit, her back was straight and her chin was level, and her face was exactly the same controlled, unreadable mask it had been when he first saw her. Nobody in the bar looked twice. Daniel left 2 bills on the bar, for the coffee he'd barely touched, and followed her out. In the lobby, near the revolving doors, away from the bar crowd, she stopped. She didn't turn around. Mr. Brooks, she said quietly. Daniel, a pause, Daniel. She stopped again, started again. I want you to understand, I do not ask people for help. I know. The fact that I'm allowing this. You're not allowing anything. You're accepting something that should have offered you a long time ago. He came around to stand beside her, not behind, so she could see him. That's different. She turned her head and looked at him. And then Dale Brooks saw something he had not expected to see in the face of one of the most powerful CEOs in America. Relief, raw, exhausted, barely held together relief. Like a person who had been carrying something very heavy, alone, for a very long time, and had just been told they were allowed to put it down. Just for a moment. Just long enough to catch their breath. Okay, she said softly. The car came in 8 minutes. Black. Clean. The kind that didn't ask questions. Daniel helped her into the back seat, not by touching her, because he understood instinctively that she would not want that. The touch of a stranger after a night of vulnerability, but by opening the door and staying close enough that if her legs gave out, he would be there. They didn't give out. She was tougher than she looked. He was beginning to think she was tougher than anyone knew. He climbed in after her, and the door closed, and the city moved past the windows in slow amber streams of light, and for a long time, neither of them said anything. Then she spoke. 12,000 people, she said, quietly, to the window. That's how many people work for Sterling Horizon. Directly employed. Another 30,000 in contractor positions across our vendor relationships. A pause. When my father built this company, he knew every single person by name on the original team. 43 people. Another pause. I know the names of my direct reports. I know the names of the people who brief me. I know my assistant's coffee order and her daughter's soccer schedule. She stopped. And I have no idea who changes the light bulbs in my conference room. Daniel was quiet for a moment. Building C, 4th floor. His name is Kevin. He's been with the facilities team for 11 years. His son just started community college. She turned from the window and looked at him. How do you know that? Because I talked to him. The silence that followed was a different kind of silence than the ones before. That was the section of our proposal you read, he said. The preventive monitoring section. What was it about it? She was quiet for a long moment. It didn't read like a facilities proposal. What did it read like? It read, like it was written by someone who understood that a building is only as functional as the people operating it, that you can't maintain a system you don't understand, and you can't understand a system without the people who actually run it. She paused. Most bids talk about equipment, response times, liability management. Another pause. Yours talked about trust. Daniel didn't say anything. I thought it was a mistake, she admitted. I thought whoever wrote it had misread the brief, that they were pitching culture consulting instead of facilities management. I wasn't, I know that now. The car slowed, the gates of a private drive. Security camera. A wave from the driver, and then a long, quiet approach through trees that were dark against the darker sky. Her house was enormous. He'd worked in buildings like this, maintained them, replaced their wiring and unclogged their systems, and stood in their marble foyers, waiting for someone to notice he was there. He'd never sat in one. The driver came around to her door. She opened it herself. Daniel got out on his side and stood on the gravel drive, breathing the night air that smelled like cut grass and late summer, and watched Victoria Sterling walk to her front door, with the same straight spine she'd walked with out of the hotel bar. In control, she paused at the door, turned back. The board meeting, she said. If tomorrow goes wrong, she stopped. It won't, he said. You don't know that, no. But I know you walked out of that hotel in a full allergic reaction, and nobody in that lobby had any idea. That's not weakness. He held her gaze. That's a kind of strength most people never develop. She stood very still. Then she said quietly, "Come inside. I need to make sure the second dose is working. My physician is on call, but She stopped. I'd rather not be alone while I wait to see." Daniel looked at her. He thought about his daughter Lily, home with his sister tonight, because his truck had broken down and he'd texted to say he'd be late. He thought about the tow truck that was still theoretically on its way. He thought about the folded incident report in his vest pocket and the clipboard he'd left, thence for service corridor. "Okay," he said. He followed her inside, and the door closed behind him. And in the morning, everything would be different. Neither of them knew yet that the person most desperate in that hotel bar tonight was not the woman with the allergic reaction and the board meeting and the 12,000 employees counting on her. It was the man who had spent 20 years being 2 steps behind everyone else and was about to find out what happened when someone finally asked him to step forward. The house was quiet in a way that felt deliberate, not peaceful, not restful, the kind of quiet that comes when someone has designed an entire life around the absence of interruption. Every surface was clean, every light was at the right angle. Even the air felt controlled, the temperature precise, the faint smell of something neutral and expensive, like a hotel that had never been lived in. Daniel stood in the entryway and noticed all of it in the way he noticed everything, the same way he'd notice a pipe that was 1 degree too hot, or a hinge that was carrying just slightly more weight than it was designed for. Not dramatic, not performed. Just the quiet habit of a man who had spent his whole life paying attention to the things most people walked past without seeing. Victoria moved to the kitchen without turning on every light, just the one above the island. She opened a cabinet, the third one, without looking, the way a person opens the cabinet they've opened 1,000 times, and took out a glass. Filled it with water from the tap, not filtered, not bottled. The tap, he noted that. It was the first ordinary thing he'd seen her do. She drank half of it standing at the counter with both hands wrapped around the glass again, and he watched the tremor in her fingers. Still there, but there. "Sit down," he said. She looked at him from across the island. "I'm fine standing." "I know. Sit down anyway." Something crossed her face, the instinctive resistance of a woman who had not taken instruction from another person in a very long time. But the tremor in her hands made the argument for him, and she knew it. She pulled out the stool on the near side of the island and sat, put the glass down, folded her hands on the counter in a way that looked composed, and probably was anything but. "Do you have a thermometer?" he asked. Second drawer, to the left of the sink. He found it. Digital. Digital. He brought it to her without asking, and she took it without protest, which told him the adrenaline was finally wearing off, and her body was starting to win the argument. Her brain had been having with it all night. She ran it across her forehead, looked at the number. 99.1, low grade. That tracks with a reaction. He came around to her side of the island, not close, but close enough to look at her eyes. Any vision changes? No. Itching? Hives? Some. Upper arms, it's fading. Clear. She met his gaze. I'm a doctor's daughter. I know the signs. If my airway was compromising, I would tell you. Would you? A beat? I would now, she said quietly. He pulled out the stool on the other side and sat down across from her. Put his forearms on the counter. He wasn't performing calm, he was calm. The way a person is calm when they've sat with a sick child through enough nights that panic stopped being a useful option years ago. Calm wasn't absence of concern, it was just the decision to be useful instead. Tell me about tomorrow, he said. Looked at him like she wasn't sure she'd heard him correctly. The board meeting, he continued. Tell me about it. Why? Because you've been holding it alone. For however long this has been building. And right now you're waiting for a medication to kick in, and talking is better than sitting here watching your own hands shake. She was quiet for a moment. Then, do you know what a poison pill is? In corporate terms? I know enough. There's a faction on my board. 3 members. Gerald Farrow, who's been with the company since my father's time, and has never forgiven me for not being my father. Catherine Marsh, who controls a significant institutional shareholder block. And Marcus Webb, who wants the CEO position himself and has spent the last 18 months building a case for why I'm unfit to hold mine. She said it without emotion, the way a general reads enemy positions on a map. Not because she didn't feel it, because she trained herself not to. They've been circulating a memo, internally, suggesting that my leadership has been too reactive, that I lack the temperament for long-term strategy, that I make decisions based on. She stopped. Her jaw tightened. Based on sentiment rather than data. Sentiment, Daniel repeated. That's the word they use. When I argued for keeping our manufacturing facility in Dayton open instead of offshoring to cut costs, that was sentiment. When I authorized 6 weeks paid parental leave instead of 4, that was sentiment. When I pushed back on a vendor contract that had 3 buried clauses that would have let them sub our work to facilities with known safety violations. She stopped again. That was sentiment. Daniel was quiet. The Dayton facility employs 1,400 people, she said. The parental leave policy reduced our turnover in the first 2 years by 22%, which saved us $4.6 million in recruitment and training costs. The vendor contract. A pause. 3 of their sub-facilities had OSHA violations within the next 14 months. 1 had a worker injury. We would have been liable. So, the sentiment, Daniel said slowly, turned out to be correct. Every time her voice was flat, not triumphant, just tired. Every single time, what they called sentiment turned out to be correct. And they still call it sentiment. Because that's not really what they mean. She looked down at her folded hands. What they mean is that I think about people. And in their model, people are a cost. They are not an asset. They are not the mechanism by which everything else functions. They are a cost, and a cost should be minimized. Daniel didn't say anything. He let it sit. My father thought about people, she said. It came out differently than everything else. Softer. Like a bruise she'd just pressed. He wasn't perfect. God, he was far from perfect. He was demanding and difficult, and he could clear a room with his mood on a bad day. But he knew the name of every person in his building. He knew which ones were going through divorces, which ones had kids with medical problems, which ones were studying for degrees at night. Not because someone briefed him, because he asked. She paused. He used to say, and I know this sounds simple, maybe even naive, he used to say that a company is just a group of people who decided to do something together. Everything else, the structure, the capital, the strategy, all of it is just scaffolding. The people are the building. The tremor in her hands had eased. She hadn't noticed yet. What happened to him? Daniel asked. Heart attack. He was 61. A pause. He was in the office. He never really left the office. The kitchen was very quiet. He left me a company that was bleeding, she continued. He had good values and terrible financial discipline. The margins were destroyed. The debt was significant. 3 of our major client contracts were up for renewal within 8 months of his death, and every one of those clients was waiting to see what happened. She looked up. I was 34 years old. I had been working in the company for 9 years, but never in operations. Always in strategy. Always one step to the side of the real power because he wanted to protect me from it. A bitter half smile, there and gone. Which meant that when I suddenly had all of it, I was doing it without a net. But you did it, I did it. No pride in her voice. Just fact. I renewed all 3 contracts. I restructured the debt. I improved the margins. I grew the company 43% in 4 years. A pause. And somehow that still isn't enough. Because the way I did it didn't match their model. Because I insisted on doing it without destroying the people my father spent 30 years building relationships with. And they call that sentiment. Daniel looked at her for a long moment. The memo they're circulating, he said carefully. The one saying you're unfit. Yes. Is tomorrow the vote? Not a formal vote. But it's the groundwork meeting. Pharaoh asked for it. He's going to present what he's calling a leadership review framework, which is a polite way of saying a case for removing you. Yes, and you've been preparing. For 3 months. Alone. She stopped. The word hung there between them. He hadn't meant it as an accusation. He'd said it the same way he'd said everything else, level, quiet, with nothing behind it except the truth. But he watched it land on her. Watched the slight flinch she didn't quite manage to suppress. And he understood that it hit something real. My executive team knows the broad strokes, she said carefully. That's not the same as not being alone. My lawyer. Also not the same. She was quiet for a long time. I have a therapist, she finally said. I see her every 2 weeks when my schedule allows, which lately has been less frequent than it should be. Another pause. She told me 3 months ago that I was exhibiting signs of acute stress and isolation, and that I needed to build a support structure outside of work. Victoria looked at her hands. I told her I'd look into it. Did you? No, he didn't say anything. I didn't, because I don't know how, she admitted. And it came out, like something she'd never said out loud before. Something that had lived in the back of her mind in the small hours of too many nights. I've spent 10 years being the person people bring their problems to. I don't know how to be the person who brings them somewhere. I don't know who that would even be. My friendships, the ones I had before they didn't survive the CEO. Not because those people were bad. Because I've changed. I became someone who was always half present. Always thinking about the next thing. Always carrying something I couldn't talk about. A long pause. And eventually they stopped calling. And I told myself that was fine. That it was the cost of the role. That she stopped. Pressed her lips together. That what? Daniel asked quietly. That not needing people was the same as being strong. He let that sit. The refrigerator hummed. Somewhere outside, something moved in the trees. The kind of ordinary sounds that filled up ordinary houses, except this one was too large and too empty, and the ordinary sounds only made it feel more so. Check your hands, he said. She looked down. The tremor was gone. Her fingers were still, flat against the counter, perfectly steady. She stared at them for a moment like they belonged to someone else. The medication's working, she said. I know. How's your chest? She took a breath. Full even. Better. The low-grade fever will break overnight. Drink more water before you sleep. If you wake up and the tightness is back, you call your physician immediately. No negotiation on that. Understood. She paused. You're very direct. I have a 10-year-old daughter. Direct is the only language that works. Something changed in her face. Small but there. How old is she? Lily. She turned 10 in April. He took out his phone not to show to it her, just the instinctive reach of a parent, then put it back. She's with my sister tonight. She knows my truck breaks down sometimes. She's used to it. A pause that was a little too long. She's used to a lot of things. Victoria watched him. Her mother? She asked carefully. Left when Lily was 3, not angry. Not sad. Just the flatness of a fact that had been a fact for a long time. She wasn't ready for the life we had. I don't blame her for knowing that. I blamed myself for a long time. For not building a different life faster. For not being further along at 32 than I was. For he stopped. This isn't about me. It's a conversation, Victoria said. You asked me about the board meeting. He looked at her. How long have you been in maintenance? She asked. 12 years. Before that. Construction management. I was working toward a project management certification. Then Lily's mother left, and I needed something with stable hours and benefits, and Tier 1 was hiring. And a pause. And 12 years went by. Do you regret it? He thought about it honestly. He respected her enough not to give her the easy answer. Some days, he said. The days when I know I could be doing more. When I look at a building and I can see exactly what's wrong with it, and exactly how to fix it, and exactly why the approach the management team is taking is going to cost them 3 times as much in 5 years. And nobody's asking, he paused. But Lily's not a regret. Not for 1 second. So the choices that led to her aren't either. Victoria looked at him with an expression he was starting to recognize. It was the look she'd had when he sat down beside her at the bar. The look that she was recalibrating something, processing information that didn't fit the category she'd tried to put it in. The proposal, she said. The one your company submitted in 2021. Did you write it? Yes. The preventive monitoring framework. The section on trust-based maintenance culture. She paused. There was a line in it. I still remember it. Something like the most expensive system failure is the one that was reported and ignored. That's from something that happened at the 3rd building I ever worked in, Daniel said. A worker in the HVAC room had been telling supervisors for 8 months that something was wrong with the primary exchange unit. He filed 3 written reports. Nobody came to look. The unit failed on a Monday morning in January, and we lost heat to a 12-story building for 4 days in a Minnesota winter. He paused. I was the one who finally went down to look at the original reports. He was right. He knew exactly what was wrong. He'd even sketched out a repair diagram in one of the reports. Another pause. He'd been right for 8 months, and nobody listened because he was the guy in the basement. Victoria was very still. I went back and read your full proposal after we'd already awarded the contract, she said quietly. I requested a copy from procurement about 6 months after we made the decision. I read it on a Saturday morning. I was in this kitchen, actually. She looked around the room like she was seeing it in a different moment. I finished it and I put it down and I thought, we made the wrong call. And then I had 7 other things happening, and I filed it, and I moved on. It's a business. I know I can't go back. Her voice was careful now. But I want you to know that the reason I read it again wasn't because of the technical specs. It was because of the way it talked about the people, the workers. The way it said a building is not a collection of systems. It is a collection of people who operate them, and the systems serve the people, not the reverse. Daniel didn't say anything. My father used to say things like that, she said. I hadn't heard anyone say things like that in a long time. The clock above the refrigerator showed 11:17 p.m. Daniel registered it the way he registered most things quietly, without making a production of it. But it landed. He'd been here over an hour. Lily would be asleep. His sister would have locked up. The tow truck was long since wherever tow trucks went when they gave up on you. I should go. I'll arrange a car. I can call a. Please. The word came out before the executive polish could catch it. Just direct and genuine and slightly tired. Let me do something useful. You've been useful all evening, and I've just. She stopped. Please. He looked at her. All right, he said. She picked up her phone. Made 2 taps. Put it down. 20 minutes. The silence that followed was different from the earlier ones. The sharp edge of emergency had gone out of it. What was left was something quieter and harder to name. 2 people in a well-lit kitchen in the middle of the night, who had arrived here by accident and were not quite ready to leave. Can I ask you something? Daniel said. You've asked me several things. One more. A pause, yes, the board meeting tomorrow. Farrow, Marsh, Webb. They're going to try to build a case that you're not equipped. That the things you've done, Dayton, the parental leave, the vendor contract were mistakes. He kept his voice measured. Are you going to walk in there and defend them? She frowned slightly. I'm going to present the data. The numbers support. I know the numbers support you. Are you going to walk in there and defend yourself? Or are you going to walk in there and go on offense? She was quiet. Because here's what I know, he continued. From 12 years of watching people try to fix buildings. The guys who spend the whole meeting explaining why the leak isn't their fault never fix the leak. The guys who walk in and say, here's where the water's coming from. Here's what we do next. Here's why it doesn't happen again. Those are the guys who actually change something. He paused. You know why they're calling it sentiment? Because they want you to defend your emotions. They want you on the back foot explaining why caring about people isn't a liability. The moment you start defending, you've already lost the frame. Victoria stared at him. Don't defend the Dayton decision, he said. Make them defend the alternative. Don't defend the parental leave. Make them explain why 43% growth alongside improved retention rates and reduced recruiting costs constitutes poor leadership. Don't. He stopped. Sorry, this is your company. You know it better than I do. No, her voice was strange. No, keep going. The safety vendor contract. Do you know specifically what the OSHA violations were at their sub-facilities? I have the reports. Which violations? Inadequate fall protection on 3 sites. 1 case of improper chemical storage. The injury was a laceration. Workers' comp claim. Operator error they classified it as, though the unions disputed. If you had signed that contract, Daniel said carefully, and one of those events happened under Sterling Horizon's vendor relationship, what would the liability exposure have been? She named a number, a large 1. Put that number in your opening statement, he said. Don't hide it in a slide deck, say it. Say 3 months after we declined this contract, one of their facilities generated a worker injury that would have cost Sterling Horizon this number in liability, plus reputational damage to our workplace safety record, which directly affects our insurance premiums, our client retention in the facilities management sector, and our ability to attract senior talent. And then let Farrow explain why that was sentiment. Victoria Sterling looked at him the way she'd looked at him in the car. The same recalibration, the same quiet, careful reassessment. Who are you? She said. I already told you. You told me your name and your job title. That's not the same thing. Daniel Brooks, he said. Maintenance father. Person who pays attention. You're not just paying attention. She stopped. You understand how power works in a room. You understand narrative. You understand how people construct cases and how to dismantle them. I've been in a lot of rooms where I wasn't supposed to matter, he said. You pay attention long enough, you start to see the mechanics. You should be doing more than maintenance. The directness of it surprised him. Not because it was wrong. Because she said it without hedging, without the polite softening people usually used when they meant the same thing, but didn't want to be rude about it. Maybe, he said. Not maybe. Her voice was certain now. The CEO voice. Not the one from the bar, the fragile underneath version, but something more grounded. Something that sounded like it had been arrived at rather than performed. I mean that. He looked at her for a long moment. Victoria, he said carefully, I appreciate what you're saying. I do. But I'm a maintenance worker who happened to be in the right place tonight. Don't let one conversation in a kitchen at midnight make me into something different. I don't do that, she said. I don't project. I see what's in front of me. A pause. I almost didn't survive tonight because I spent 6 hours alone at a business dinner pretending to be fine. I'm not going to sit here and pretend I don't see what's in front of me. He held her gaze. My physician has a 24-hour line, she said. I'm going to call and brief her on the reaction. I should have done that an hour ago. Yes, you should have. I'm going to do it now. She stood from the stool, steadily, no tremor. The color was back in her face, or at least some of it was the unwell paleness of the hotel bar replaced by something more present. The car will be here in 5 minutes. I'll come back out. She moved toward the hallway, stopped at the edge of the kitchen. Daniel. Yeah, thank you. She didn't turn around, stood with her back to him, one hand on the wall, and set it to the hallway. Not for the ride, for a pause, for paying attention. He didn't say anything. Sometimes there was nothing useful to add to a sentence like that. Sometimes you just let it exist. She disappeared down the hallway, and he heard the quiet murmur of a phone call start somewhere in the distance. And he sat alone in the kitchen of the largest house he'd ever been inside and looked at the glass she'd left a feet on the counter and the bottle of antihistamine beside it. He was going to go home, pick up his truck in the morning, go back to work on Friday, file the incident report, go home to Lily, make pancakes on Saturday, because she'd been asking for 2 weeks, and he kept forgetting. Nothing about tonight would change anything. He believed that, sitting in that kitchen. He was wrong. The car arrived at 11:38 p.m. The driver pulled into the long gravel drive and waited with the quiet professionalism of someone paid not to notice things. Victoria walked Daniel to the front door. She looked steadier. The phone call to her physician had apparently been thorough, he could tell by the way she moved, the small releasing of the last held tension, the look of someone who has finally done the thing they should have done 2 hours ago, and felt the relief of it. She opened the front door. "The board meeting," he said at the threshold. "You'll do well. You sound certain." "I am." She studied him in the light from the doorway. 42 years old. He would guess, though he didn't ask, and she looked 10 years older than that tonight, and somehow also younger, the controlled professional surface worn down to something more honest and more human. "The truck," she said, "in the hotel garage. I'll have someone from our facilities team look at it in the morning. You don't have to." "I know I don't." Quiet and firm. "I want to." He looked at her. "Okay," he said. He walked to the car. The driver opened the back door. He got in. The window was down, and before the driver pulled forward, he heard her voice one more time from the doorway. Low, not quite loud enough to be certain he was meant to hear it. "Don't be 2 steps behind, Daniel." He didn't respond. He wasn't sure he was supposed to. The car pulled forward. The headlights swept across the dark trees. The gravel crunched under the tires. And then they were through the gate, and the gate closed, and the house went dark in the rear window. He rode back across the city in silence, watching the lights move past, thinking about 12,000 people, and a maintenance worker, with a sketch of a repair diagram that nobody read for 8 months, and a woman who had designed her entire life around not needing anyone, and was sitting alone in a very large house tonight because of it. He thought about Lily. About the way she sometimes came into the kitchen at night, when she couldn't sleep and didn't say anything, just pulled up the stool and sat near him while he read, and how that just the nearness, just the presence, just the act of being in the same room seemed to be enough for both of them. He thought about what Victoria had said, that not needing people was the same as being strong. He thought about his sister, who had said almost exactly the same thing to him 6 years ago, standing in his kitchen, 3 months after Lily's mother left, when he'd refused for the 4th time to let anyone come help him. "You think doing it alone makes you stronger. It makes you tired, Daniel. It just makes you very, very tired." She had been right. He'd been tired for a long time. He wondered if Victoria Sterling had anyone who loved her enough to tell her that. He suspected she didn't. And that, he thought, as the car crossed the bridge, back into the city's ordinary grid of streets and ordinary lights, that was the real thing she was fighting tomorrow. Not Farrow or Marsh or Webb. Not the board. Not the memo or the leadership review framework or the 18 months of carefully constructed political siege. The real thing she was fighting was the story she'd been telling herself for 10 years. That doing it alone was the same as being capable. That not breaking was the same as being strong. That needing no one was the price you paid to lead. He hoped she won tomorrow. He hoped, more than that winning would show her what losing that story might make possible. The car stopped in front of his apartment building at 12:04 a.m. The driver confirmed the address twice. Daniel thanked him, got out into the night air and stood for a moment on the sidewalk, his boots on concrete, his vest still faintly damp from the burst pipe 3 hours ago that felt like it had happened in a different week. He went upstairs. His sister had left a light on. He turned it off. He stood in Lily's doorway for a moment. She was asleep on her back with one arm thrown over the edge of the bed, which was how she always slept, defying gravity and comfort in equal measure. He pulled the door halfway closed. He sat on the edge of his own bed in the dark and thought about the morning. Friday, 4th floor. Kevin's light fixture in conference room B had been flickering since Tuesday. The elevator in the south wing needed its monthly calibration check. An ordinary day. His phone buzzed, an unknown number. He almost let it go to voicemail. He answered. "This is Gerald Farrow," said the voice on the other end. Smooth, unhurried. The voice of a man who believed his calls were always answered and always on his schedule. "I'm a board member at Sterling Horizon. I believe you spent the evening with our CEO." Daniel went very still. "I want you to understand something, Mr. Brooks." The voice stayed smooth. Pleasant, even. The pleasantness of someone holding something behind their back. "What you did tonight was kind. I'm sure it was well-intentioned. But what happens next, that's going to depend very much on what you choose to do with the next 24 hours. A pause. I'd like to meet. Tomorrow morning, before the board meeting. I think we could have a very productive conversation. Daniel sat in the dark. He thought about the maintenance worker with the sketch of the repair diagram. 8 months of being ignored. 8 months of being right. 8 months of no one coming down to the basement to look. Mr. Farrow, he said, yes, I start work at 7. If you'd like to talk, you know where to find me. He ended the call. He sat in the dark for another 3 minutes. Then he plugged in his phone, lay down, and closed his eyes. He did not sleep well, but he slept. Gerald Farrow arrived at the Harrington Grand at 6:47 a.m. Daniel knew this because the hotel's front desk called the maintenance line at 6:48 to report that a guest in the lobby was asking for a building services contact. Daniel had been there since 6:15, working through the calibration check on the South Wing elevator that he'd logged for Friday. He took the call standing in the elevator shaft access corridor with a wrench in his hand and grease on his left thumb. He told the front desk he'd be there in 10 minutes. He took 12, not to make a point, because the calibration actually took 12 minutes to finish correctly, and leaving it half done would mean coming back to it later. And Daniel Brooks did not leave things half done. Farrow was sitting in one of the lobby armchairs near the window. 70, maybe 72, silver hair cut close. Dark suit, no tie, which was the specific kind of casual that cost more than formal. He was the kind of man who had spent decades being the most important person in every room he entered, and had arranged his body language accordingly. The loose posture, the unhurried stillness, the way he held his phone, like he was doing it a favor by touching it. He looked up when Daniel came through the lobby in his work vest, wrench still in hand, and something moved across his face. Not quite what Daniel expected, not contempt. Something more calculating than that. The look of a man revising an estimate. Mr. Brooks, he stood, extended a hand. Daniel shook it, firm, equal. He had learned a long time ago that the handshake was the first test, and the test was always about whether you believed you deserved to be in the room. Mr. Farrow, thank you for meeting me. I'm on the clock. I've got about 20 minutes before my next scheduled check. Farrow smiled. The smile of a man who found useful things useful and had no particular feelings about them beyond that. Then I'll be direct, please. They sat. Farrow leaned forward, elbows on knees, the posture of false intimacy that Daniel had watched executives use in 100 meetings he was supposed to be invisible in. Last night, Farrow began. You spent several hours with Victoria Sterling. You drove with her to her home. You were inside her residence until well past midnight. He paused. This information has reached me from 2 independent sources. I'm aware you know. You don't seem concerned. Should I be? Farrow studied him. That depends on your intentions. My intentions were to make sure a person who was medically unwell got home safely and didn't deteriorate in a hotel bar alone. Daniel kept his voice level. That's it, of course. The smile again. Smooth and empty as a polished floor. And I have no doubt that's true. You strike me as a straightforward man, Mr. Brooks. That's actually why I wanted to talk. He paused, letting the silence do some work. Victoria is a remarkable woman. She's intelligent, she's committed, and she has genuine affection for the company her father built. I've known her since she was 17 years old. I watched her grow up. Daniel waited. But she is in a role, Farrow continued carefully, that requires a particular kind of leadership. A kind that is, and I say this with real fondness, not her natural strength. She cares deeply. She cares, in fact, too deeply, and in a company of 12,000 people with share and fiduciary responsibilities, and a board that answers to significant institutional investors, caring too deeply is, he paused. It's a liability. You think caring about your employees is a liability. I think allowing personal feeling to drive institutional decisions is a liability. Yes, he looked directly at Daniel, the Dayton facility, the vendor contract, the leave policy. Each of those decisions cost the company in the short term. She'll tell you the long-term numbers justify them, and mathematically she's not entirely wrong. But what she doesn't understand, what she refuses to understand, is that a board of directors does not operate on 3-year horizons. They operate on quarterly returns. And quarterly returns answer to people who have placed significant capital in this company's future and who expect to make money, to see responsible stewardship of their investment. Yes, and removing Victoria is responsible stewardship. Pharaoh sat back slightly. Transitioning leadership, when the current leadership is creating unnecessary institutional risk, is absolutely the board's responsibility. Daniel looked at him. He thought about something Victoria had said in the kitchen the night before, the way she'd said sentiment like she was repeating a word in a language she'd been forced to learn but didn't believe in. He thought about the vendor contract, and the OSHA violations, and the liability number she'd named without hesitating. "What do you want from me?" Daniel asked, and there it was. The smallest shift in Pharaoh's expression. The moment where the smooth pleasantness cracked just slightly at the edges, and something more honest came through. Not malice, exactly, just the naked reality of a man who had always been used to transactions. "Nothing dramatic," Pharaoh said. "I simply want you to understand the full picture. You spent one evening with Victoria Sterling, one evening in which she was, by your own account, unwell and vulnerable. That creates a particular kind of impression. It's human to feel protective of someone you've helped." He paused. "But the reality of her leadership, the full record, the pattern of decisions, you don't have that context. And I would hate for a good man with a family to find himself in a complicated situation because of a chance encounter and incomplete information." "A complicated situation," Daniel repeated. "Victoria's position is going to be reviewed today. Regardless of how that review goes, the events of last night are going to be part of the broader conversation about her judgment. The fact that she allowed an outside contractor, someone she'd never met, access to her private residence while she was medically compromised, while making decisions about her own care without consulting her physician in real time." He spread his hands. "None of that reflects well on her, and by proximity, none of it reflects particularly well on you." Daniel was very still. "Now," Pharaoh continued, "if your account of the evening was simply, you noticed a guest in distress, you assisted, briefly, you ensured she had access to her own vehicle and driver, and you went home, that is a different story entirely. A story that makes you a decent person who did a decent thing and moved on. No complications, no associations. No questions about how a maintenance worker from a third-party contractor came to spend 3 hours inside the CEO's home." He paused. "Do you understand what I'm saying?" Daniel understood exactly what he was saying. He sat with it for a moment, felt the weight of it, the shape of it, the way it was designed to feel like an offer when it was actually a threat dressed in concern. He had been in rooms where things like this happened, not at this level, not with this many zeros behind them. But the mechanics were the same. Someone with power and someone without it, and a door that only opened one way. He thought about Lily. Her arm hanging off the edge of the bed, the pancakes he'd promised for Saturday. He thought about his sister telling him he was tired. He thought about the maintenance worker with the sketch of the repair diagram, reporting 8 months in a row to people who found it inconvenient to look. "Mr. Pharaoh," he said. "Yes. I'm going to tell you something, and I want you to hear it clearly." Pharaoh waited. "I didn't stay at Victoria Sterling's home because I was confused about the situation. I didn't help her because I was trying to position myself for something. I helped her because she was sick and alone, and she needed someone to pay attention, and I was there." He kept his voice completely even. No anger in it, no performance, just the quiet weight of a decision already made. Whatever happens in that board meeting today is going to happen because of her record and her work and her judgment over 4 years of leading that company. Not because of me, not because of last night, he stood. And my account of the evening is exactly what happened. I'm not going to give you a different one." Pharaoh looked up at him. For the first time, the smooth pleasantness was completely gone. What was underneath it wasn't anger either. It was the expression of a man recalibrating, the way Victoria had recalibrated the night before, but where hers had been about upgrading her assessment of him, his was something else. Something colder. "You understand," Pharaoh said carefully, "that your employment here is through a third-party contractor that has a service agreement with this hotel. You're a board member at Sterling Horizon. You don't have a mechanism to affect my employment." Daniel picked up his wrench. But if you'd like to try, I keep very good records. He left Pharaoh in the lobby chair. He went back to finish the elevator calibration. His hands were steady the whole time. He told himself they would stay that way. By the time Daniel's shift ended, at 3 p.m., 3 things had happened that he did not expect. The first was that truck was back in the parking garage, running. He found it when he went to check on it at lunch. There was a small envelope tucked under the wiper blade. Inside was a receipt for the repair new battery, alternator replaced, and a handwritten note on sterling head. That's said only, "Thank you for paying attention. V." He stood in the parking garage for a long moment, looking at that note. Then he folded it and put it in the same vest pocket as the incident report from Thursday night. The second thing that happened was that Richard Hale called him. He didn't know who Richard Hale was when the number came through on his work cell at 1:15 p.m. The man identified himself as CFO of Sterling Horizon, which meant very little to Daniel except that he was senior, and his voice had the focused energy of someone who had been in a difficult meeting all morning and was still processing it. "I'm going to be honest with you," Hale said, without preamble. "I spent the last 4 hours in a boardroom watching Gerald Pharaoh try to dismantle a leadership record that, on the merits, does not deserve to be dismantled. And I spent the last 4 hours watching Victoria Sterling systematically take apart every argument he made with data. I frankly should have been more familiar with myself." A pause. She named a liability figure in her opening statement that stopped Pharaoh cold. "I don't know where it came from. It wasn't in her prep materials as of Wednesday." Daniel was quiet. "She also said something I want to ask you about," Hale continued. "She said, and I'm paraphrasing, that a company is not a collection of systems. It's a collection of people who operate them, and the systems serve the people, not the reverse." Another pause. "I've been CFO of Sterling Horizon for 7 years. I know Victoria's speech patterns. I know her frameworks." That one was new. It sounded like something she'd heard recently. He paused again. "From someone who builds things." "I'm maintenance," Daniel said. "I fix things." "Is it?" "Not a question." "What do you want, Mr. Hale?" "I want to understand who you are. Direct. No dressing." Because Pharaoh tried to use last night as evidence of poor judgment on Victoria's part, allowing a stranger access, making compromised medical decisions. And instead of being put on the defensive, she turned it into the opening of her case. She said. And the room was dead quiet. When she said it, the fact that a maintenance worker in a hotel lobby saw what my own board did not see is not a failure of my judgment. It is a failure of this board's relationship with the people who actually run this company. Daniel closed his eyes for a second. "She won the morning," Hale said. "Pharaoh doesn't have the votes today. He didn't have them before the meeting, but now he's lost 2 of his soft supporters because Victoria walked in there and didn't defend herself. She went on offense. Someone told her to do that. She's a smart woman who's been building that case for 3 months, Daniel said. She didn't need me to tell her anything, but she needed someone to say it out loud." Hale's voice was quieter now. "Sometimes you know something, and you still need someone else to say it, before it becomes real, before you trust it enough to use it." Daniel didn't answer. "I've been reviewing our facilities situation," Hale said. "The vendor contract we're currently running on building safety and operations. It expires in 4 months. I've also been reading something from our procurement archive. A proposal from 2021, tier building services." He stopped. "I want to have a conversation, not today, when things settle. I want to have a real conversation about what Sterling Horizon's approach to facilities management and workplace safety should look like." "You should talk to my company," Daniel said. "I'm not. I want to talk to the person who wrote that proposal." The line was quiet. "Call me when things settle," Daniel said finally. "I will." A pause, "Mr. Brooks. For what it's worth, what you did last night. Making sure she got home. Staying until you knew she was stable." A long pause. "Thank you." Daniel went back to work. The third thing that happened was the hardest. At 2:40 p.m., 20 minutes before his shift ended, his work cell rang again. He was in the storage room doing inventory, the most boring part of the week. The part he usually knocked out fast with music in one ear. He pulled the earbud and answered. "Daddy," Lily's voice. which meant she was on his sister Carol's phone, which meant something had happened at school. Because Lily knew not to call during his shift except for emergencies, and the careful way she'd said, "Not Dad," which was her usual, since she'd decided at age 8 that Dad was more age-appropriate, told him immediately that she was either hurt or upset, and trying not to show him which. "Hey, Bug, what's wrong?" A pause, the specific pause of a 10-year-old deciding how much to say. "Mrs. Patterson called Aunt Carol," Lily said, "because of what happened at lunch." "What happened at lunch?" "Some kids were talking about that thing." Another pause. "About you being at some lady's house last night." Daniel stopped what he was doing. "What kids?" he said. His voice was careful, even. The voice he used when he needed Lily to know that whatever she said next was safe. "Jalen's dad works for a company, and he told Jalen, and Jalen told..." She stopped. "It doesn't matter. They were saying things, and I told them to stop, and Mrs. Patterson had to come over, and now Aunt Carol says I have to tell you." "What were they saying, Lily?" The silence this time was longer. He could hear her breathing, could picture her exactly sitting in Carol's kitchen, probably, feet tucked under her, on the chair, her hair half out of whatever she'd put it in that morning. The particular posture she had when she was carrying something she didn't know how to put down. "They said you were trying to get money from some rich lady. That you did something to get close to her so she'd pay you." She said it all at once, fast, like ripping off a bandage. "And I told them that wasn't true. I told them you don't do stuff like that." And Jalen said his dad said. Her voice cracked, very slightly, quickly controlled. "I just told them they were wrong." And then Mrs. Patterson came. Daniel sat down on a box of cleaning supplies. He thought about Pharaoh in the lobby chair that morning. If your account of the evening was simply, and whatever mechanism Pharaoh had used to get information to 2 independent sources by midnight, it hadn't stopped at the people he'd told. It had moved, the way these things moved, sideways and downward through the layers of connections, losing accuracy and gaining venom at every stop. "Lily," he said. "Yeah, look at me." He always said that, even on the phone. Force of habit. Lily had told him once that it still worked, that when he said "look at me" even through a speaker she did. Somehow, found the center of what he was saying. "You were right. They were wrong. I know." Firm his daughter, all the way. "I know I was right, Daddy. I just..." She stopped. "I don't like when people say things about you." "I know. You always tell me that what people say about us doesn't matter as much as what's actually true. That the truth is..." She was clearly reciting something. Not mockingly, genuinely, the way kids hold on to the things their parents say when they need them most. The truth is the structure, and everything else is just noise around it. He had said that. He'd said it approximately 400 times in various forms since she was 5 years old, usually in relation to things far smaller than this. "That's right," he said. "So I'm not upset about what they said." A pause. "I just wanted to make sure you knew." "I know, Bug. Thank you for telling me. Are you okay?" He looked around the storage room. Boxes of industrial cleaner and replacement filters and 3 broken mop handles he'd been mean to requisition replacements for since March. "Yeah," he said, "I'm okay." A pause. Aunt Carol made soup. The kind with the noodles. "Tell her I'll be there by 5:30. "Okay." Another pause, smaller this time. "Daddy?" "Yeah." "Was she nice? The lady?" He thought about a kitchen at midnight, and a woman pressing her hands flat on the counter to hide the shaking. And the way she'd said, "Thank you for paying attention to the hallway instead of to him," because she couldn't quite manage to say it to a person's face. He thought about, "Don't be 2 steps behind, Daniel." He thought about a handwritten note in corporate letterhead tucked under a wiper blade. "Yeah," he said. She was good, satisfied, final. "I'll tell Aunt Carol 5:30. She hung up. Daniel sat on the box of cleaning supplies for another minute. Then he stood up, finished the inventory, and clocked out. He was halfway across the parking lot to his newly running truck when someone said his name. Not his work name, not Brooks or maintenance, his actual name. He turned. Victoria Sterling was standing 15 feet away in a charcoal coat that was different from the suit of the night before, but somehow conveyed exactly the same thing: precision, control. The architecture of someone who had learned that presentation was its own form of protection. She was standing very straight. Her hands were at her sides, both of them, Steady. She looked like herself. Not the woman from the hotel bar. Not the woman in the kitchen at midnight, the CEO. The one who had walked out of that lobby last night, with a full allergic reaction, and made sure nobody noticed. But she had come to a parking lot. She had come to find him. "You should have called," he said. "I don't have your number." A pause. "I got the parking garage from the hotel facilities log." "You checked the facilities log. I needed to make sure you knew before you heard from someone else what happened this morning." "Hale called me." Something shifted in her expression. "Richard called you. He wanted to know who wrote the 2021 proposal." She was quiet for a moment. "What did you tell him?" "That he should call when things settled." Victoria looked at him for a long moment. The afternoon light was going gray at the edges, the kind of October gray that committed slowly, and then all at once, and she stood in it with her coat and her posture and her steady hands, and he could see her deciding something. "Farrow approached you this morning," she said. It wasn't a question. "Yes, he called me at 8:45, before the meeting." Her voice was controlled, but something moved underneath it, not quite anger, not quite hurt, something older and colder than either of those. "He told me that you had agreed to provide a simplified account of the evening. That you'd confirmed there was nothing of note, no medical incident, nothing unusual." She paused. "He wanted me to know that he had handled it, that the situation was contained." Daniel stared at her. "He lied," Daniel said. "I know." Her voice was very even. "Because I know what you said in that lobby. Because the front desk manager was passing through when you left and heard the end of it. Because Gerald Farrow has been lying in every room he enters for 18 months, and I have learned to check his facts independently." She took a breath. "He told you things that were not true as well, I expect. He implied he could affect my employment. He cannot. Fast. Absolute. Your contract is with Tier 1, which has no relationship to Sterling Horizon. I checked that before I came here." A pause. "He also implied, I imagine, that my position was more precarious than it is." He said, "You were going to be reviewed regardless." That much was true. The rest was theater. She paused. The meeting ended at 1 p.m. Farrow didn't have the votes. He never had enough votes. But this morning he lost the two he thought were soft. "Catherine Marsh voted with me." I was surprised by that. She stopped. Apparently the liability numbers were persuasive. I imagine they were. A silence. "You told me to go on offense," she said. "You told me you already knew the numbers. Knowing something and being ready to lead with it are different things." She looked at him steadily. "You know that." He did know that. "Someone talked," he said, "about last night. It reached a 10-year-old at a school in the North Side by lunchtime." Her expression changed. The control held, but something underneath it tightened. "Lily, she's fine. She handled it better than most adults would have." He paused. "But it's moving, Victoria. Whatever Farrow put out there, or whoever he told who told someone else it's moving. I know." Her voice was quieter now. "I've been managing incoming calls since 11 a.m. 3 board members, my PR team, 2 reporters from local business press." She paused. "They're framing it exactly the way Farrow intended. CEO in compromise situation with outside contractor. Personal entanglement affecting institutional judgment. That's not what happened." "I know what happened." Her voice was steady and sharp. "I was there." A pause. "But narrative is not about what happened. It's about what people will believe when they only have half the information." She looked at him directly. "You're going to be pulled into this. You need to be prepared for that." What does being prepared look like? It looks like deciding, right now, how you want to handle it. Because the version Farrow is selling is already out there. And if you don't have a version, people will fill in space with his. She paused. "I have a PR team. They're good. If you want, they can." "No," the word came out clean and final. She stopped. "I'm not going to manage a narrative," he said. "I helped someone who needed help. If someone asks me what happened, I'll tell them what happened. That's my version." He paused. "I'm not going to sand it down to something that's easier for a board meeting." Something moved across her face. Not surprise exactly. More like recognition. Like she was seeing something she'd half expected but hadn't let herself quite count on. "That is either very principled or very naive," she said. "Probably some of both," she almost smiled. A pause. It's also, for what it's worth, exactly what I told my PR team when they asked me how to play it. She paused. I told them the truth was the strategy. They were not enthusiastic. What did you tell them? I told them that a CEO who allows herself to be caught in a moment of medical vulnerability, who accepts help from a stranger because it was the right thing to accept, who is honest about the fact that she was not managing a carefully constructed public image in that hotel bar, that is either a liability or it's the most human thing this company has seen from its leadership in a decade. She paused. I told them I was betting on human. He looked at her in the gray afternoon light. The vendors, he said. The 2021 contract. Hale mentioned the facilities agreement is up in 4 months. Yes, that's not why I helped you last night. I know that. Her voice was immediate. Certain, Daniel, I know that. That is not. She stopped. Took a breath. I'm not here about the contract. Then why are you here? She looked at him, and for a moment, just a moment, the CEO architecture came down. Not the way it had in the hotel bar, when it was coming down because her body was failing. This was different. This was a choice. Because Pharaoh called you at midnight, she said quietly. Because he found your number, and he called you in the middle of the night and tried to use your daughter's stability and your job and your reputation as leverage. And that happened because of me, because you helped me. She paused. And I needed you to know that. I know that. And she stopped again. I don't take that lightly. Daniel was quiet. I also needed to ask you something, she said. Ask the proposal, the preventive monitoring framework, the section on trust-based operations culture. She paused. Is that just a proposal, or is it something you actually know how to build? He looked at her steadily. I've built pieces of it. In smaller contexts, individual buildings, individual teams. What would it take to build it at scale? At the scale of Sterling Horizon? Yes, he thought about it. Really thought about it. Not the reflexive deflection of a man who had spent 12 years being asked to do less than he was capable of. The right access, he said. The right authority. People who actually listen to the workers instead of just the managers who manage the workers. A pause. And time. Real time, not a 60-day deliverable window. What if I told you I was creating a new position? Victoria said. Director of Workplace Safety and Operations. Reporting directly to the executive team, with full access to all facilities, all sites, all worker consultation channels. She paused. What if I told you I wrote the job description this morning, between the end of the board meeting and driving here? Daniel stared at her. I'd say you move fast. I've been thinking about it for 3 months. She met his gaze. Since I reread your proposal. He was quiet for a long time. The parking lot was emptying around them. A cold wind came through, and he felt it on his face, and neither of them moved. Victoria, he said her name carefully. I'm a maintenance worker. I don't have a degree in operations management. I don't have executive experience. I have 12 years of building services, and a proposal that someone read once. I have a CFO who just called you on his own initiative, because he was moved enough by a walk-yoke gateway to track down your work number on a Friday afternoon. She held his gaze. I have a board that doesn't know you exist yet, but will. I have 12,000 employees who are going to trust or not trust this initiative, based on whether the person running it actually understands what their workdays feel like. She paused. And I have a read of your proposal that I've done 4 times now, which tells me that the person who wrote it has been doing executive-level thinking in a maintenance vest for a decade. And the only thing missing was someone with the authority to say, this is the level at which you belong. He looked at her. You're offering me this because I helped you last night, he said. No. The word was firm and clear. I'm offering you this because of a proposal you wrote in 2021 that I should have acted on in 2021 and didn't. Because of a safety framework you've apparently been implementing piecemeal in individual buildings for years, without the resources or the authority to do it at scale. Because Richard Hale called me after he called you and said, she stopped. Started again, he said. That man thinks about buildings the way you think about the company, and you should figure out if that's a coincidence or not. A pause. It's not a coincidence. Daniel looked at the ground, at his boots, still faintly marked from the burst pipe 3 days ago that felt like 3 weeks. He thought about Kevin on the fourth floor, whose son had just started community college. About the maintenance worker in Minnesota with the repair diagram that nobody read for 8 months. About Lily saying, "You don't do stuff like that," and meaning it the way only a child who absolutely believed in her father could mean it. He thought about 12 years of being 2 steps behind, and a voice in a doorway at midnight saying, "Don't be 2 steps behind, Daniel." "I need to think," he said. "I know, I need to talk to Lily." "Of course. And I need to understand." He looked up. "If this goes forward, if I take this, it cannot be because of last night. That's not where it comes from. The moment anyone can point at last night and say that's the reason, it poisons everything I'd try to build. Every worker who's supposed to trust me would have a reason not to. Every executive who already thinks I don't belong in the room would have the ammunition they need." Victoria held his gaze without flinching. "I know that. Which is why the announcement, if there is one, will reference the 2021 proposal by name. The record will show a 3-month internal review that began before last night existed. The job description was drawn from your published framework." She paused. "The truth is the strategy, remember?" He was quiet. "You said it first," she added. He almost smiled. "Almost." "Give me the weekend," he said. "You have it." She reached into her coat pocket and produced a card. Clean, minimal, just her name and a number. She held it out, and he took it, and their hands were close for a moment, without touching, and then she stepped back. "One more thing," he said. She waited. "Pharaoh isn't done." He said it without heat. Just the matter-of-fact reading of a situation, the way he'd read a building system, that still had pressure in the wrong places. He lost this morning. People like that don't stop because they lose. They reframe. They find a new angle. He paused. "Whatever comes next, and something will you need to be ready for it to come through me. Not you, because coming through you didn't work." Victoria was very still. "I know," she said quietly. "I know that's what he'll do." A pause. "Are you telling me that changes your answer?" He looked at her. He thought about Lily. About Carol's soup with the noodles. About an ordinary weekend with ordinary problems that was waiting for him on the other side of this parking lot. "No," he said. "I'm telling you so. That when it happens, you don't spend time wondering what he'll try. You already know, and knowing is the difference between reacting and being ready." She looked at him for a long moment. "You really have been doing executive-level thinking in a maintenance vest," she said quietly. "Someone had to." She turned and walked to her car. He watched her go with the same attention he brought to everything, not intrusive, not performed. Just present. The walk was steady, the coat was straight. The posture was everything it was supposed to be. But just before she reached the door, she turned back one more time. And from that distance, across the gray-lit parking lot, with the cold coming in, and both their days behind them, in ways neither would fully explain to anyone, he saw something in her face that he hadn't seen before. Not relief, not professionalism. Something quieter and harder to name. Something that looked a lot like hope. She got in the car and drove away. Daniel stood in the lot for another minute. Then he got in his truck, his repaired, running truck, with its new battery and new alternator, and the receipt he'd carry in his pocket for a long time, and drove to his sister's house for soup. Lily was on the front step when he pulled up, because she always heard the truck 2 houses before it arrived. A habit from 3 years old that she'd never grown out of. She didn't say anything about the phone call. Didn't ask about the lady. Just slid off the step and walked to the truck and let him wrap one arm around her while they went inside. Sometimes that was the whole conversation. Sometimes that was everything. The pancakes happened on Saturday. Daniel made them the way Lily liked, with blueberries folded in, not on top, because she said blueberries on top were decorative, and blueberries folded in were intentional. A distinction she had maintained with complete seriousness since she was 7 years old. He made enough for Carol, too, who had stayed over because she'd been staying over us on weekends since Lily was 3, and it had simply become part of the architecture of their lives, the way certain habits did when they were built from necessity, and then stayed because they were good. Carol sat across from him at the kitchen table, while Lily ate and talked about a project she was doing on ecosystems, and the particular injustice of having been assigned the tundra when her best friend Maya got the coral reef, And Daniel listened and responded and refilled the syrup and did all the ordinary things that ordinary Saturday mornings required. And when Lily finished and took her plate to the sink and disappeared into her room to work on the Tundra with the focused grievance of a child who was going to make the best possible Tundra presentation, despite the unfairness of the assignment, Carol looked at Daniel across the table and said, "Tell me," he told her. "Not everything, but enough. The hotel bar, the allergic reaction, the drive to the house, Pharaoh's call at midnight, the conversation in the parking lot Friday afternoon, the card in his pocket, the job offer." Carol listened the way she always listened, completely still. No interruptions, her coffee going cold because she forgot to drink it when she was paying attention. She had worked in hospital administration for 22 years,
and she said the chistlesa listening posture of someone
who had learned that the most important information was usually the thing people said right after they thought they'd finished. When he was done, she was quiet for a long moment. "And Lily knows some of it," she said. "The school version." "Yes, how is she?" "She's fine, she's Lily." He paused. "She asked me if the woman was nice." Carol looked at him with the particular expression she reserved for moments when she thought he was being deliberately obtuse. "Daniel, I know what you're going to say, do you? You're going to say that the job offer is real, and I should take it and stop talking myself out of things I'm qualified to do. I was also going to say that a woman who had her car repaired and drove herself to a hotel parking lot to make sure you were all right before the weekend started is not someone who only thinks about you as an employee." She picked up her coffee. "But sure, the job thing too. It's not," he stopped. "It's not what? It's complicated. Everything is complicated when you decide it is." Carol drank her coffee. "Some things are also simple if you let them be." He didn't answer that. "The job," she said, steering, because she knew him well enough to know when to steer. "Walk me through why you're hesitating." "Because if I walk into that company and it doesn't work, if the executives don't accept it, if the workers don't trust it, if Pharaoh finds a new angle, and this time it sticks, I don't just lose the job. I lose the argument. Every person who's ever been overlooked because of their title, instead of their ability, loses the argument. Because I'll have been the case study for why you don't promote the maintenance worker to the executive floor." Carol put her cup down. "That," she said carefully, "is the most important thing you've said so far. And also the most unfair thing you've ever asked yourself to carry. It's true, it might happen. That's not the same as it being true." She leaned forward. "Daniel, you have spent 12 years making every building you touch safer and more functional and better than when you found it. And you've done it without the title or the authority or the resources you needed to do it right. And you've done it anyway because that's who you are." She paused. "The question isn't whether you can do the job. You know you can. The question is whether you're willing to do it where people can see you. Because that's the part that scares you, not the work. Being visible while you do it." He sat with that. Outside, a car went past. Lily's music started in her room, something with too much bass, that she thought the door muffled more than it did. "If it fails," Carol said quietly, "it fails. And you will have tried something real, and it will have cost something real, and you will get up and figure out what's next. That's what you do." She looked at him. "But if it works, Daniel, if it actually works." She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. He called Victoria on Sunday morning. She answered on the second ring, which told him she'd been expecting it, or at the very least had been carrying the phone close. "I'll take the position," he said, "on one condition." "Name it." "I start in the field, not in an office. The first 60 days, I'm in every facility, every site, every shift. Talking to workers, not managers. Reading the actual state of things, not the reported state. And whatever I find goes directly to you, unfiltered, before it goes anywhere else." A pause. "That's not a condition, that's the job description." "Then we're in agreement." "We're in agreement." A pause. "Daniel, you're going to face significant resistance. I want you to be clear-eyed about that." "I am." "The executive team is going to question the appointment. Some of them loudly. Hale is with us, but Hale is one voice. Our chief operating officer, a man named Preston Gage, has been with the company 9 years and has strong opinions about organizational structure and where expertise comes from." She paused. "He's going to be a problem." What kind of problem? The polite kind, which is worse in some ways than the impolite kind. He won't be hostile, he'll be rigorous. He'll ask for credentials you don't have on paper, and qualifications you can't cite in a resume, Venan. He'll do it all with complete professional courtesy, and the effect will be the same as if he'd just told you to get out of the room. How do I handle that? The same way you handle everything, from what I can tell. You ignore the frame and answer the actual question underneath it. A pause. The actual question underneath Preston's rigor is always, will this work? And how do I know? Answer that. Don't answer the credential question. Answer the will it work question. He thought about that. What's his biggest operational concern right now? A brief silence. How do you mean, in the company? What's the thing keeping Preston Gage up at night? The number that's wrong, or the system that's failing, or the problem that keeps coming back no matter what they do? She was quiet for a moment. Worker compensation claims. We've had a 17% increase over 18 months across our manufacturing sites. He's convinced it's a training issue. He's put 3 training programs in place. The numbers haven't moved. It's not a training issue, Daniel said. What is it? I don't know yet. Could be equipment. Could be reporting culture workers who don't report near misses before they become incidents, because they're afraid of the process. Could be shift scheduling creating fatigue patterns. He paused. But if 3 training programs haven't moved the number, the problem is upstream of the behavior they're trying to train. A long pause on the line. Tell Preston that, Victoria said quietly. In those words, in that order, on your first day. Or I could look at the data first and tell him something specific. Even better. He started the following Monday. The announcement went out Thursday of the prior week, internal only. 3 paragraphs, factual. The 2021 proposal, cited by name in the second paragraph. No fanfare, no origin story, just the position, the scope, the name. Daniel Brooks, Director of Workplace Safety and Operations, effective immediately. His work cell received 6 texts in the first hour. 3 from people at Tier 1, who'd heard and were congratulatory in the specific way of people who are not entirely sure how they feel. 2 from union contacts he'd had for years, short and careful, waiting to see. 1 from Kevin on the 4th floor at the Harrington, which said only, heard the news. About time. Don't forget about the flickering light in B. He didn't. He requisitioned the replacement ballast on his last day at Tier 1 and left a note for the incoming contractor. He walked into Sterling Horizon's headquarters on Monday morning in the same kind of work clothes he'd always worn, not the maintenance vest, but not a suit either. Dark pants, a clean button-down, boots that were presentable without pretending to be something they weren't. He had thought about this for most of Sunday evening. He had decided that showing up as someone he wasn't on the first day would cost him more than showing up as himself. The reception desk gave him a badge, visitor style, orange border, because his credentials hadn't fully processed through HR yet. He noted the color and said nothing about it. He found his office a real one, with a door, which was still mildly disorienting, and spent 45 minutes reading the worker compensation data that Victoria had pulled for him over the weekend before he had his first meeting of the day. The first meeting was Preston Gage. Gage came to Daniel's office, which was itself a statement senior executives did not usually come to new directors. They summoned. The fact that he came in person to Daniel's space with a leather portfolio and a calm expression and absolutely no warmth told Daniel everything he needed to know about the kind of opposition this was going to be. Mr. Brooks. He sat without being invited to, which was also a statement. Welcome to Sterling Horizon. Thank you. I'll be direct with you. Please. I have significant reservations about this appointment. He set the portfolio on the desk and folded his hands over it. He was 55, maybe 57. The kind of fit that came from discipline rather than youth. His face was the kind of composed that had been composed for so long it no longer cost him anything. Not personal ones, structural ones. Tell me about them. The Director of Workplace Safety and Operations is a senior executive position. It carries authority over a budget of roughly $42 million annually across all sites. It interacts with legal, with HR, with operations management, and directly with the board on safety compliance matters. He paused. The qualifications for this role in any comparable organization would include a minimum of a master's level education in operations management or a related field, 8 to 10 years of executive or senior management experience, and demonstrated leadership of teams of more than 50 people. A pause. Your background is in building maintenance services. Yes, I've read the 2021 proposal. And it's an intelligent document. He said it the way people said things they genuinely meant but wished they didn't. But intelligent thinking and organizational execution at scale are different capabilities. You're right, Daniel said. Gage paused. He'd clearly expected a defense. They are different capabilities, Daniel continued. Thinking clearly about a problem is not the same as having the organizational authority, the budget, and the team infrastructure to solve it at scale. I know that. Which is why the first 60 days of this role aren't going to look like anything on an org chart. I'm going to be in your facilities, your sites, your shift floors. He paused. You have a worker compensation problem. Gage's expression didn't change. We're addressing it. 3 training programs, 17% increase still holding. Daniel kept his voice level. I spent Sunday reading your incident reports. Not the summary reports. The individual incident reports from the last 18 months. All of them. He paused. You know what I found? Gage waited. 63% of the incidents that generated claims occurred within the first 90 minutes of a shift. Any shift day, swing overnight, didn't matter. He paused. That's not a training failure. Training failures distribute randomly across the shift. What distributes in the first 90 minutes is equipment startup behavior and pre-shift safety check compliance. He paused again. I need to see your pre-shift check protocols and your equipment warm-up logs for the 3 sites with the highest incident concentration. Gage was quiet for a long moment. That analysis isn't in any of our internal reports, he said carefully. No, because whoever wrote your internal reports was summarizing the training program outcomes. They weren't reading the individual incident times. Daniel held his gaze. I read the individual incident times. Gage looked at him with an expression that was not yet respect but was no longer contempt. The gap between those two things was significant, and Daniel knew it, and he also knew that the path from one to the other was not going to be paved by this conversation alone. It was going to be built, slowly, out of work. I'll have the protocols and the logs on your desk by end of day, Gage said. Thank you. Gage picked up his portfolio, stood, paused at the door. Mr. Brooks. I want to be clear that my reservations are not withdrawn. They are. He stopped. Started again. They are pending. That's fair, Daniel said. Pending is fine. Pending means you're still looking. Something moved in Gage's face, the smallest thing. There and gone, he left. Daniel turned back to the incident reports. The first 60 days were the hardest thing he'd done since the first year of raising Lily alone. Not because the work was unfamiliar. The work was the most familiar thing he'd done. It was every building he'd ever maintained, every system he'd ever diagnosed, every worker he'd ever stopped to talk to, while everyone else kept walking. But the scale of it was something he had to learn in real time. And the politics of it were something he had to navigate without a map. And there were days when both of those things were happening simultaneously, and he had to keep moving through them, because stopping was not an option. He visited the manufacturing facility in Dayton on day 6. The one Victoria had refused to close. He spent 2 full shifts there, the day shift, and the swing shift, not observing from the floor manager's office, but on the floor itself, talking to workers, watching the startup sequences, reading the equipment logs with his own hands. By noon on his first day there, 3 workers had told him things that had never made it into a single report. A pressurization valve on line 4 that had been stiff for 6 months. Workers had been compensating for it manually, a small extra motion in the startup sequence that added about 4 seconds, and a specific wrist angle that, over a 10-hour shift repeated across 5 days a week, was generating repetitive stress injuries that were being coded as strain, operator error in the incident reports. Nobody had flagged the valve because the line was still producing. The line was still producing because the workers were compensating. The workers were compensating because 3 of them had tried to report it through the standard channel 8 months ago, and the response had been a notation in the log, and no visit. The notation was still in the log. 3 notes, 8 months old, unaddressed. He stood at that valve on the floor of the Dayton facility and thought about Minnesota, about the maintenance worker with the sketch of the repair diagram. About 8 months. He called Victoria at 4 p.m. from the parking lot. Line 4 in Dayton, he said without preamble. Pressurization valve. Diff, 6 months. Workers compensating manually. Repetitive stress pattern generating claims that are being classified as operator error. The valve needs to be replaced, not serviced. Serviced it 3 times already. I can see the maintenance records. Replacement parts are roughly $400. The 3 workers with the most acute compensation claims have been in physical therapy for a combined $11,000 so far this year. And we haven't resolved the root cause. The silence on the other end lasted about 4 seconds. How long until you have it in writing? I'm writing it now. You'll have it before 7. Copy Preston. Already planning to. Another pause. Are you okay? He thought about the valve. About the 3 notes, about 8 months. I'm fine, he said. And then, because of a hotel bar, and a kitchen at midnight, and a woman who had looked at him when he exactly the same, so, and said, "You're not fine, I'm frustrated. The problem is fixable. It should have been fixed 8 months ago." I know, her voice was quiet. Write it up, we'll fix it. I know you will, Daniel. A pause. Thank you for going to Dayton. It's the job. No, she said. I've had people in the director of operations role before. None of them spent day 6 on the factory floor during swing shift. A pause. Thank you for going to Dayton. He didn't argue with her. He sent the report at 6:47 p.m. The valve was replaced by the following Tuesday. Pharaoh's next move came on day 19. Daniel had been expecting it, had been watching the edges of things the way you watched for pressure building in a system you knew wasn't fully stable. But the shape of it surprised him slightly. Because Pharaoh was smarter than the midnight phone call had suggested. He'd learned from what didn't work. He didn't come at Daniel directly. He went to the press. A business column in the city's major daily paper, under a byline Daniel didn't recognize, ran a piece about Sterling Horizon's leadership restructuring. Balanced on the surface. Professional. It quoted anonymous board sources expressing concern about what it called the rapid promotion of an external contractor with no executive credentials to a senior operations role. It raised questions about the process. It noted, in the 4th paragraph, that the new director had been present at the CEO's private residence on the night before a significant board meeting. It did not say anything false. It arranged true things in an order designed to suggest something that hadn't happened. Daniel read it at 6 a.m. on a Thursday in his kitchen, with his coffee getting cold the same way Carol's always did when she was paying attention to something. He called Victoria. "I've seen it," she said. She'd clearly been awake for a while. "Do you want me to respond?" "No, I'm responding." "Victoria, I'm responding," she said again, and her voice had the quality it had had in the board meeting. The quality he'd heard about secondhand from Hale Level, and absolutely resolved. Not to defend you, not to explain last night. I'm going to do an interview. With the paper today. I've already called the editor. About what? About the Dayton valve, he paused. That's not $400 in parts. $11,000 in worker compensation costs. 3 unreported maintenance requests sitting in a log for 8 months because no one with authority ever went down to the floor to read them. She paused. I'm going to talk about that. I'm going to talk about what this position is doing, and what it has found in 19 days, and what it means for 12,000 workers who have been reporting problems into a void. She paused. And I'm going to talk about where the idea for the position came from, and that it came from a proposal written in 2021 by a man who understood something about building operations that our entire executive team had missed. Another pause. The story they want to tell is about a maintenance worker who shouldn't be in the room. I'm going to tell the story about what happens when you put the right person in the room. Daniel was quiet. You said the truth is the strategy, she said. I said it back to you. You said it first, then we both said it. And I mean it. He thought about Lily at the school, telling Jalen he was wrong with the certainty of someone who had no reason to doubt her father. He thought about a parking lot and a woman in a charcoal coat saying, "Don't be 2 steps behind." Okay, he said, do the interview. The piece ran 2 days later. Different byline. The editor's own byline, which told Daniel something about how seriously it had been taken. It ran on the front page of the business section, with a headline that said, simply, Sterling Horizon CEO, we were reading the wrong reports. It was 3,000 words. It quoted the Dayton valve numbers. It quoted the 2021 proposal. It quoted, toward the end, something Victoria had apparently said when the interviewer asked about the night at the hotel, the allergic reaction, the chain of events, the question everyone wanted answered. She had said, a man saw that I needed help and he helped me. And when I saw what he was capable of, I did what any leader should do. I stopped letting the title on the door tell me less than the work in front of me. Daniel read that line twice. He read it a third time. Then, he put the paper down and finished his coffee and drove to Sterling Horizon's distribution facility in the eastern part of the state, where he had 3 days of floor visits scheduled and a backlog of incident reports that were going to tell him things nobody had thought to read yet. The executive resistance didn't collapse after the article. He hadn't expected it to. Gage was still pending, still watching, still rigorous, still asking questions that sounded like tests but were actually. Daniel had come to understand just how Gage processed things. The man was not his enemy. He was someone who had built his entire career around a particular model of how competence was identified, and being asked to expand that model at his age and his level was genuinely hard. Daniel respected that, even when it was inconvenient. The others were more mixed. The chief human resources officer, a woman named Sandra Lim, became an unexpected ally in week 3 when Daniel walked her through the pre-shift check data, and she immediately connected it to patterns she'd seen in exit interviews for 3 years that nobody had connected to safety systems. They spent 2 hours at a whiteboard in her office that neither of them had planned on, and by the end of it, she was finishing his sentences about reporting culture and psychological safety, and the specific way workers go quiet when they've learned that speaking costs more than it returns. I've been saying this for 2 years, she said, standing at the board with a marker in her hand, that the incident reports don't show us what's actually happening. They show us what people are willing to put in writing after they've calculated the risk. She looked at Daniel. Nobody listened. I know how that feels, he said. She laughed, abrupt and genuine. I imagine you do. They built the reporting framework together over the next 4 weeks, a parallel channel, separate from the formal incident process, that allowed workers to flag concerns without attaching their name to a formal complaint. Not anonymous. Daniel didn't want anonymous, because anonymous feedback was easy to ignore and easy to dismiss. Instead, it went through the safety director's office directly. His office, with a committed 48-hour response window and a logged follow-up requirement. He named it the direct report line, not because the name was elegant, because it was accurate. And he had learned from 12 years of maintenance work that accurate names were the ones people actually used. The first week, 14 reports came in. He responded to all 14 personally within 24 hours. Word moved the way word moved in buildings, sideways and underground, and faster than any announcement. By week 6 of the program, 41 reports had come in. 37 had been addressed. 4 were in process. The 4 in process had been logged visibly, with expected resolution dates, so that the people who'd filed them could see that something was happening. The compensation claim numbers didn't move immediately. He hadn't expected them to. Systems that had been building problems for 18 months didn't reverse in 6 weeks. But the near-miss reports started coming in, the things that happened, and didn't become incidents, the close calls that workers had previously absorbed in silence because the formal process was too heavy and the informal process didn't exist. Near-miss reports were the leading indicator. They came before the injury numbers moved. If you were reading the right data, they told you where you were, headed before you got there. He briefed Gage on the near-miss data in week 8. Gage read the report in silence, set it down, looked at the window for a moment. Looked back. This is predictive, he said. Yes. If the near-miss concentration in the Eastern Distribution Center is what this shows, we're going to see a significant incident there within the next 60 days, months if we don't address the conveyor loading protocol. That's my read too. What's the fix? Two things. The loading sequence needs to be adjusted. The current sequence has workers moving against the belt direction during the heavy load phase, and the shift rotation at that facility has 3 workers who've been on mandatory overtime for 6 weeks running. Fatigue-related near misses spike in overtime week 4 and beyond. I've got the data to show that if you want it. Gage was quiet. What does the loading sequence adjustment cost? He said finally. 45 hours of retraining, about $3,000 in modified equipment guides, and telling the shift manager that he needs to stop scheduling overtime past week 3, which costs us short-term production throughput and saves us a compensation claim that would run between $30,000 and $80,000, depending on severity. Gage picked up his pen. What do you need from me? Daniel looked at him. In 9 weeks, that was the first time Preston Gage had asked him what he needed. Sign off on the retraining schedule, Daniel said, and a conversation with the Eastern Facility Operations Manager. He needs to hear from you that the overtime cap is a directive, not a suggestion. I'll call him today, thank you. Gage stood, picked up the report, paused Mr. Brooks. He didn't look up from the report. The Dayton numbers. The compensation costs year-to-date since the valve replacement. Down 31% on line 4. Too early for the overall site numbers to show it fully, but the trajectory is there. Gage nodded. Once, the smallest possible nod of a man acknowledging something he would have preferred to have seen differently, and was being honest enough with himself to acknowledge anyway. Pending, Daniel said quietly. Gage looked up. You said your reservations were pending, Daniel said. I'm just keeping track. Something shifted in Gage's face. Not a smile. Preston Gage did not appear to be a man who smiled easily, but something in the vicinity of one. Something that acknowledged quietly that the conversation had been had, and the ground had moved slightly, and both of them knew it. He left without another word. Daniel sat alone in his office with the near-miss data and the Eastern Facility report, and the direct report line inbox that had 4 unresolved items that he would work through before he went home, and he felt for the first time in a long time, the first time in maybe 12 years, that he was doing exactly what he was supposed to be doing. Not despite everything. Because of it. Because of 12 years of basements and fluorescent lights and service corridors and being 2 steps behind. Because of a daughter who had never once doubted him. Because of a sister who made soup and said simple things that were true. Because of a hotel bar on a Thursday night and a woman with shaking hands who needed someone to pay attention. He thought about what Victoria had said in her interview. I stopped letting the title on the door tell me less than the work in front of me. He thought about Kevin's light fixture in conference room B. He pulled out his phone and texted the Harrington's new maintenance contractor. Check the ballast in conference room B, 4th floor. It was in the queue when I left. Make sure it got done. The response came back in 10 minutes, already handled. Who is this? He smiled. Nobody important, he typed back. Just someone who was paying attention. The board hearing was called for a Tuesday in December. Not a regular meeting, a special session. Gerald Farrow had requested it formally in writing, with 12 days' notice, and a 7-page document attached that outlined what he called a comprehensive performance review of recent organizational decisions, language precise enough to sound procedural and vague, enough to cover everything he actually wanted to say. Daniel found out about it on a Wednesday morning, when Victoria called him at 7:15, before he'd left for the Eastern Distribution Facility, where he had a follow-up scheduled on the conveyor loading protocol that Gage had signed off on 3 weeks prior. Farrow filed a formal review request, she said. I know. Hale texted me last night. A pause. Richard texted you. We talk. He didn't elaborate. The truth was that Hale had been calling him approximately twice past month, not about the compensation numbers or the safety reports, but about something harder to quantify. He'd said it plainly on their 3rd call. I've been CFO for 7 years, and I have never once walked through one of our manufacturing facilities. I want to do a site visit. Will you take me? Daniel had taken him to Dayton. They'd spent 6 hours there. Hale had not said much during the visit itself, but on the drive back he'd been quiet for a long time and then said, I owe some people better than they've gotten from me. Daniel had not disagreed. The hearing is in 12 days, Victoria said. Farrow wants to present what he's calling an evidence package. The appointment, the process, the timeline, the article, the compensation data, all of it. He's framing it as a governance question. Whether proper procedure was followed in creating the position and making the appointment. Was it? Technically, a director-level appointment at this salary range requires board notifications, but not board approval. I notified the board, so yes, technically procedure was followed. A pause. But Farrow knows that the governance question is the vehicle. The actual argument is going to be about whether the appointment was sound, whether the results justify the process, whether I exercised good judgment or personal judgment, and whether those are the same thing. She paused again. He's going to ask you to appear. I know, Daniel. You don't have to. I know that too. If you appear, he will try to use the hearing to undermine the work, to make it about the night at the hotel, instead of the Dayton valve and the near-miss data, and the direct report line. He's going to try to make it about whether I manipulated you. The word landed in the silence between them. Yes, she said quietly. He stood in his kitchen. The morning was gray outside the window, the kind of December gray that had committed fully, the one that said winter wasn't coming anymore. It was here. It had arrived. It had unpacked. He could hear Lily moving in her room, getting ready for school, the specific choreography of a 10-year-old who was never quite running late, but was never exactly on time either. I'll appear, he said. Daniel Victoria. He said her name the way he said things when they were decided. Level, final, not harsh. I'm not going to let Farrow tell the story. I'm not going to let the board read a 7-page document about organizational decisions and not have the person at the center of those decisions in the room. He paused. That's not how I operate. A long silence on the line. No, she said finally. It's not. Tell me what to prepare. Everything, every site visit, every incident report, every number before and after, the direct report line data, the Dayton repair costs versus the compensation costs, the Eastern facility near-miss intervention timeline. A pause. But more than that, and this is the part that matters, bring the workers. Not in person, in testimony. Written testimony from the floor workers at the sites you've visited, from the people who filed reports, from the Dayton line workers who've been in physical therapy. Her voice was steady and certain, and he recognized the quality in it, the same quality it had had when she'd walked into the board meeting in October with the liability numbers. The voice of someone who had decided, Farrow wants to make this about process. I want to make it about people. He cannot argue with the people. He spent the next 11 days in a way that would have surprised anyone who thought the director of workplace safety interference was primarily an office job. He went back to Dayton. He went to the Eastern Distribution Facility. He went to 3 other sites he hadn't visited yet, but that his data flagged as overdue. He spent a combined 41 hours in direct conversations with floor workers, shift supervisors, safety leads, and the people whose names appeared in incident reports as claimants, the workers who'd been hurt, who'd filed claims, who'd gone through the compensation process, and come out the other side with all the ambivalence that process generated. He didn't ask them to advocate for him. He didn't frame it as anything political. He told every single person the same thing. I'm going to a meeting. Board of directors. They want to know if what we've been doing here is real. I want to bring your words into that room. Exactly your words, not a summary. Nothing added, nothing taken out. Only what you actually want to say. Some of them said no. He respected that completely and moved on. Most of them said yes. He collected 47 written statements. Not letters of support, he hadn't asked for those. Just accounts, what the situation had been, what changed, what they noticed. Written in the language of people who worked with their hands and had spent years being translated into management speak by people who thought they were helping and were actually just making them easier to ignore. He read all 47 statements the night before the hearing. He was still at his desk at 11:30 p.m. when his phone lit up. Victoria, you should sleep, she said. I'm reading. I know. I can see your office light from the street. He looked up. You're outside? I was driving home. I saw the light. A pause. I almost kept driving. But you didn't. No. A pause. Are you ready? He thought about that honestly. For the hearing? Yes. For whatever Pharaoh does when the hearing doesn't go his way. I don't know yet. That depends on what he has left. He paused. Are you? I've been ready since October, she said. I was ready before October, actually. I just didn't know it. A pause. I think I needed someone to tell me to stop defending and start leading. You already knew that. I needed to hear it. A pause. Daniel. Whatever happens tomorrow, I want you to know that what you've built in 3 months is real. The numbers are real. The people are real. Whatever Pharaoh says in that room, none of that stops being true. I know, and I want you to know. She stopped. Started again more carefully. I want you to know that the reason I drove to that parking lot in October, the reason I came to find you myself, instead of having someone call it, wasn't about the company. It wasn't about the board, or the narrative, or the contract. A pause that was longer than the others. I came because I wanted to. Because you were the first person in a very long time who saw me as a person and not a position, and I didn't know how to say thank you for that in a way that was adequate. So I fixed your truck, and I drove to a parking lot, and I told you not to be 2 steps behind. She paused. That's all it was. He was quiet for a long moment. Go home, Victoria, he said gently. Get some sleep. A soft exhale, almost a laugh. Yes, sir, and thank you, he said, for driving to the parking lot. The line was quiet for a moment. Then she said, very softly, good night, Daniel. Good night. He sat alone in his office for another hour, reading the last of the 47 statements. Then he turned off the light and went home. The board hearing convened at 9 a.m. in Sterling Horizon's 42nd floor conference room, which had a view of the city. That was the kind of thing people mentioned in descriptions of the building, and that Daniel had read about without ever expecting to see from this angle. There were 11 board members. 8 were present in person. 3 on screen. Pharaoh sat at the far end of the table with Catherine Marsh on one side, and Marcus Webb, who had not spoken to Daniel once in 3 months, on the other. Hale was present. Gage was present, which surprised Daniel slightly. He hadn't been required to attend. He'd come on his own. Victoria opened the session. She did not spend time on procedural framing. She said, the purpose of the meeting was to address the performance and process of the Director of Workplace Safety and Operations role, and that she intended to present data first and take questions after, and that she had invited the director to speak on his own behalf. Then she handed it to Daniel. He did not use a slide deck. He had thought about it. Sandra Lim had offered to build him one, and it would have been professional and clean, and would have given him somewhere to put his eyes when the room got heavy. He decided against it. He'd been in enough rooms where the slide deck became people looked at instead of the person presenting, and he needed them to look at him today. He stood. I want to start with something, he said. Not a number. Something someone said to me. The room was quiet. I spent a day at our Dayton facility 8 weeks ago. I was on the floor during the day shift and the swing shift. At about 4 in the afternoon, I was talking to a worker on line 4. The line with the pressurization valve that had been logged as problematic 3 separate times over 8 months without a response. His name is Marcus Del Rey. He's been with that facility for 11 years. He's 53 years old. He has a daughter in her 2nd year of nursing school. He paused. I asked him why, after 3 logged reports, he hadn't escalated the issue further. And he looked at me not angry, not bitter, just honest, and he said, because I didn't think anyone was going to come. The room was very still. He wasn't wrong, Daniel said. No one came. For 8 months, no one came. And in those 8 months, the workers on that line developed a compensation pattern that cost this company $11,000 in physical therapy claims, cost 3 people real pain in their wrists and shoulders, and cost this company something harder to put a number on: the trust of the people who actually run that facility. He looked around the room. Pharaoh's face was composed, waiting. I'm going to tell you what has happened since someone came, Daniel continued. Not because I want credit for it, but because I want this board to understand what was possible all along and what it cost to wait. He laid out the numbers, unhurried, precise. The Dayton valve, $400 in parts, 31% reduction in line 4 compensation claims, $11,000 in physical therapy costs that had stopped accumulating, the Eastern Distribution Facility, the conveyor protocol adjustment, the overtime cap, the near-miss data that had predicted a major incident and allowed it to be prevented. The direct report line, 47 active reports in 8 weeks, 41 resolved, response time averaging 22 hours, not the 48 he'd committed to 22. He put the overall compensation claim trajectory on the table, not as a slide, as a printed page that he set in front of each board member personally, walking the length of the table while Farrow watched him. 18% reduction across all sites in the 8 weeks since the intervention programs had launched. Statistically significant, not a full reversal of the 18-month increase. He was honest about that. Full reversal would take another quarter, maybe 2. And he said so. But the direction had changed. The trajectory had changed. And trajectory was everything. Then he laid down the testimony. 47 printed statements. He did not read them. He put them in the center of the table and said, "These are words from the workers who have been part of what we've built in the last 3 months. I told every one of them that their words would come into this room exactly as written. Nothing added, nothing taken out." He paused. "I'd ask the board to read them before making any determination today. Not because they're arguments, because they're the actual voices of the people this decision affects. And I believe this board deserves to make its decision knowing those voices." He sat down. Farrow waited approximately 4 seconds before he spoke. The pause of a man calibrating, not hesitating. "Thank you, Mr. Brooks. The numbers are, as you say, encouraging. Though I'd note that 8 weeks is an insufficient data window to establish causal attribution to any specific intervention." He kept his voice entirely pleasant, entirely professional. "My concern today is not with what has been done. My concern is with how it was done and what it represents as a precedent for how this board's governance is respected." He paused. "The appointment of a senior director without executive credentials, drawing a salary at a level that triggers board notification requirements, made under circumstances that were at minimum unusual, represents a question about process that this board has a fiduciary responsibility to address." He looked at Daniel. "Mr. Brooks, you're a capable man. I don't doubt that. The work you've done in 3 months is, I'll acknowledge, more than I expected." He said this precisely the way a person said something true that they wished were false. But capability is not the question. The question is whether the manner of this appointment sets a precedent that this board can endorse. Whether the process, Mr. Farrow. The voice came from the far end of the table. Not Victoria, not Hale, Preston Gage. Every head turned. Gage did not speak at board hearings except when called upon. This was understood. He was CO. He attended as a resource. He was not on the board. His presence was informational, not participatory. He spoke anyway. "I want to address the governance question directly," Gage said. His voice was the same as it always was, controlled, precise, carrying no more warmth than it needed to. "Because I was this appointment's most significant internal critic. I made my reservations known directly to Mr. Brooks on his first morning in the role. I put them plainly. I did not attempt to obscure them." Farrow was watching him with an expression that had gone very careful. "In 9 weeks, Gage continued, Mr. Brooks identified a root cause in our compensation claim pattern that 3 consecutive training programs and 18 months of internal review had failed to identify. He did this by reading individual incident reports at a level of detail that no one in this building, including myself, had done. He then identified a near-incident pattern at our Eastern facility that, based on the data I have reviewed, would have resulted in a significant worker injury within 60 days. The intervention cost approximately $3,000 and 45 hours of retraining." He paused. The injury it likely prevented would have cost between $30,000 and $80,000 in direct costs, plus liability, plus reputational exposure, plus the human cost to the worker involved, which I am aware is not a line item, but which I am choosing to name anyway. Another pause. "The process question Mr. Farrow raises is legitimate. The notification requirement was met. But if the governance concern is whether this appointment was sound, whether the judgment behind it sound, I want this board to have my answer to that question on record." He looked down the table. It was. The silence in the room was the kind that happened when something said plainly met the truth at the same angle, and the collision was audible. Faro tried to recover. He was skilled enough to try. He moved to the next argument, the circumstances, the optics, the nature of how Daniel had come to Victoria's attention. He said the word optics 3 times in 4 minutes, which Daniel had learned was what people said when they didn't have a better word for this looks bad and couldn't say this looks bad, without acknowledging that looks were driving the argument instead of substance. Victoria let him finish. Then she said very quietly, "Gerald, I want to ask you something." Faro looked at her. The proposal that Daniel submitted in 2021, the Tier 1 building services bid. You were on the board at that time. You were not involved in the vendor selection, but you were present for the quarterly facilities report in which it was discussed. She paused. Do you remember what you said about it? Faro was still. You said, Victoria continued, and I have the meeting transcript if anyone would like to see it. You said that the proposal was interesting in theory, but impractical at our scale. Those were your words. She paused. What is now practical at our scale, Gerald, is everything that proposal described. Built by the person who wrote it, in 3 months. She paused. My question is what, exactly, is the governance concern? That I acted on a judgment you dismissed in 2021, or that I was right? The silence that followed was a different kind of silence. Catherine Marsh, who had voted with Victoria in October, and whose expression throughout the morning had been the careful neutrality of someone watching a situation resolve, spoke for the first time. I'd like to call the vote, she said. The vote on whether to continue the governance review was 7-4 against. Faro voted yes. Webb voted yes. 2 others, the ones whose support Faro had thought was solid in October and had turned out to be softer than that, voted yes as well. 7 voted to close the review. It was over in 11 minutes. What came after was quieter and harder, and more real than any board meeting. Daniel walked out of the 42nd floor conference room at 11:20 a.m. and stood in the elevator corridor and let himself feel it, not the win, not the relief, but the weight of what the morning had actually been. 47 statements on a conference room table. Marcus Delray's 11 years and his daughter in nursing school, and his simple, unembellished statement that he hadn't thought anyone was going to come. Preston Gage saying, the human cost to the worker involved, which I am aware is not a line item, but which I am choosing to name anyway. He stood in the corridor for 2 minutes. Then he went back to work. He had a report due on the Eastern Facilities progress. He had 3 unreviewed direct report line submissions from that morning. He had a call with Sandra Lim at 2 p.m. about expanding the parallel reporting channel to the administrative sites, which had different safety profiles than the manufacturing sites, but their own patterns that the standard incident process was almost certainly missing. He was in his office by noon. Hale stopped by at 12:30. He didn't sit, just stood in the doorway. How are you? Working. Hale nodded, like that was the right answer. For what it's worth, what Gage said in there. He paused. I've known Preston for 9 years. I have never heard him volunteer a statement at a board hearing. Not once. He paused. Whatever you did in those 9 weeks, you did something. He did something, Daniel said. He looked at the data and told the truth about what he saw. That's on him. Hale looked at him for a moment. That's what you always do, isn't it? Give it to the person who actually did it. It's the only way any of it means anything. Hale nodded again, straightened. The facilities contract renewal. Tier 1. It's up in 6 weeks. I know. I think the conversation you and I had about how we approach that needs to include you in the room. Not as a vendor. As the person who defines what we actually need. He paused. I should have thought about what we needed before now. I've been thinking about what we could get cheap. He said it without self-pity. Just the flatness of a fact he was done pretending wasn't one. I'm done with cheap. I'll be in the room, Daniel said. Hale left. Victoria came at 4 o'clock. Not as a CEO stopping by a director's office. She knocked, which she didn't always do, and when he said come in, she closed the door behind her, which she also didn't always do. She sat in the chair across from his desk. Are you okay? She asked. He thought about how she'd said that exact thing after the Dayton call 8 weeks ago. In a parking lot, when he'd told her he was frustrated about the valve and the 8 months and the 3 notes sitting in a log. How she'd asked it genuinely, not as a check-in, not as management performance, but because she'd wanted to know. Yes, he said, and then, I keep thinking about Marcus Del Rey. Tell me. He said he didn't think anyone was going to come. And I'm sitting here thinking about how many Marcuses there are. Not just in this company, everywhere. People who have been reporting things correctly, doing the right thing, filing the right notes, and waiting not angrily, not desperately, just waiting to see if anyone comes. He paused. The direct report line handled it here. For now, for this company, in this moment. But it's not a system. It's a person, me. And that's not scalable, and it's not sustainable. And the thing that actually needs to change is the culture, Victoria said. The culture, the assumption. The thing that makes it normal, expected, automatic, for someone with authority to go down to the floor and look. He paused. That's not 3 months of work, that's years. I know, she said. That's why you're here. He looked at her. I mean that, Daniel. That's not a speech. That's you are here because this is years of work, and you are the person who will do it, and I am the person with the position to make sure you have what you need to do it. She paused. As long as I'm here, Pharaoh will try again. He'll try something. It won't look the same. He's smart enough to know the same approach won't work twice. She paused. But I'm not afraid of it. I think that's what's changed, the actual thing that changed, not the board vote. I'm not afraid of it. A pause. I spent 4 years being afraid of the next attack, carrying it alone, preparing for it in the middle of the night, in a very large house where no one could see me doing it. She looked at him steadily. I'm done with that. I'm not doing it alone anymore. He held her gaze. Good, he said. She's small, real, the kind that was entirely hers. My therapist is pleased. Tell her she was right about the support structure. She knows. A pause. My schedule has been more consistent lately. Apparently, when you stop preparing for catastrophe at 2 in the morning, you have more time for other things. She paused. I've been painting again. I painted through college and stopped when I came to work at the company. I've been doing it on Sunday mornings. Lily would probably find that boring. The mention of Lily made him look up. She's been asking about you, actually, he said. Victoria paused. Lily? She knows things turned out okay with the board. I gave her the abbreviated version. She asked if the nice lady was all right. He paused. I said yes, she said good, and went back to her Tundra project, which she finished and got an A- on. She is genuinely aggrieved about the minus. Victoria laughed. A real one. Not the brief escaped sound from the hotel bar, a full one, present and warm. What's wrong with the minus? She argues that her Tundra bibliography had 12 sources, and Maya's coral reef only had 8. She doesn't feel the grade reflects the research differential. She's not wrong. No, she's completely right. She's also 10. He paused. She wants to know if tundra animals are as interesting as coral reef animals. I've been researching Arctic foxes for 2 weeks. Victoria smiled again. What's the verdict? Arctic foxes are extraordinarily interesting and significantly underrated. Lily is now planning a follow-up presentation on permafrost that no one has asked for. She sounds like you. She's better than me. He said it without any of the complicated weight that statement might have carried, without the doubt, or the qualification, or the wondering if it was enough. He said it. The way a person said something simply true. She's going to be extraordinary. She already is, Victoria said. Based on available evidence. He looked at her. There were things in the room that hadn't been said. He was aware of them, the way he was aware of pressure, in a system not quite visible, present in the way it changed how everything else moved. There was the woman in the kitchen at midnight, and the handwritten note on corporate letterhead, and a charcoal coat in a parking lot, and a voice saying, "Don't be 2 steps behind." There was the fact that she knocked on his door today, and closed it behind her, and asked if he was okay before she said anything else. He was aware of all of it. He let it be what it was for now. Something that didn't need to be named today. Something that the next weeks and months would show him the shape of, if he paid attention the way he paid attention to everything. Go home, he said. Paint something. She stood. You too. I have 3 submissions in the direct report line. Daniel, 48-hour commitment. I'm at 22 hours in on 2 of them. He met her eyes. I'll be done by 6. She looked at him for a moment with the expression he had come to know best, though that was somewhere between exasperated and something much warmer. The one that said she understood exactly who she was dealing with and had stopped trying to argue with it. 6 o'clock, she said. 6 o'clock. She opened the door, paused with one hand on the frame. The article, she said. The editor called today. They want to do a follow-up piece. The board hearing, the 8-week numbers, the direct report line. She paused. I told them yes. Tell them to talk to Marcus Del Rey. She looked back at him. I will. She left. He turned back to the submissions. He worked until 5:58 p.m., resolved all 3, logged the responses. Set the follow-up dates. Sent Sandra the summary she'd need for the administrative site expansion proposal. They were building together. Then he put on his coat, turned off his office light, and took the elevator down. The lobby of Sterling Horizon was busy at 6 p.m. on a December Tuesday, people heading home. A shift change in the facilities team that kept the building running, the evening security crew coming on. He walked through it, the way he walked through every building, noticing the things that were working, the things that weren't. The person at the security desk who looked tired. The facilities worker, by the service elevator, whose ID badge was flipped backward, the kind of small thing that happened when people were moving fast and didn't have time to fix it. That sometimes meant something, and sometimes ants didn't, and you only knew which by paying attention. He stopped. Hey, he said. The facilities worker looked up, startled. Badges flipped. Security will flag you on the way out. The worker, early 20s, knew Daniel, didn't know his name, yet looked down at his badge and turned it around. Oh, thanks, man. They would have held me up for 20 minutes. You're on the evening crew? Yeah, first week. Daniel Brooks, he extended his hand. The young man shook it. Slightly uncertain, the way people were uncertain when someone they didn't know introduced themselves formally. Terrence, welcome to Sterling Horizon, Terrence. You have questions about anything, how the systems work, who to talk to, where the bodies are buried, come find me. I'm on the 4th floor, my door's open. Terrence looked at him, then at his coat, then back at his face. Are you an executive? I'm the director of workplace safety and operations, Daniel said, which means I work for the 12,000 people in this building, not the other way around. He paused. So yes, come find me. He pushed through the lobby door into the December cold. He drove home the same route he always drove, past the same streets he'd been driving past for 12 years. The city looked the same. The lights were the same. The people on the sidewalks were moving, with the same cold weather urgency that December always produced. But he sat differently in the driver's seat. Not straighter, not more important, just more present, more occupying the space he was in, rather than holding himself to the edges of it the way a man did when he'd spent a long time believing the space wasn't entirely his. Lily was in the front window when he pulled up. She still heard the truck 2 houses out, even with the new alternator, which had a slightly different sound than the old one. She must have recalibrated. He went up the walk. She opened the door before he could reach it. I have a question about permafrost, she said, immediately, not as a greeting, just as the continuation of a conversation that had apparently been running in her head all day. Hello to you too, hello. Can permafrost melt? Yes. It's one of the significant concerns about. Then, why is it called permafrost if it's not permanent? She held the door open with the expression of someone who had been sitting with a genuine grievance all afternoon. That's false advertising. It was named when people thought it was permanent. But it's not. No, it's not. She considered this. So the name is wrong. The name is outdated. That's different. She thought about it for another second. Then, are you hungry? Aunt Carol made chili. Is she here? She's always here on Tuesdays, said with the complete assurance of a child for whom Tuesday and Carol had been the same word for as long as memory ran. He followed her inside. The chili smelled right. Carol was at the stove with her back to him, and she raised a hand without turning, the universal greeting of someone who knew his footsteps. He hung up his coat. He sat at the kitchen table, where he had sat on 1,000 ordinary evenings and some that were not ordinary at all, and Lily climbed onto the chair across from him and propped her chin in her hands. watching him with the specific attention of a child who wanted something and was calculating the approach. "The permafrost thing," she said. "I want to add a section. The presentation is done. A supplementary section. It got an A-. Because of the section, I should have added." She looked at him steadily. "You always say the work isn't done until the problem is actually solved, not just until the assignment is finished." He looked at his daughter, 10 years old, sitting at the kitchen table on a Tuesday in December, making the argument he'd made 100 times back to him with the precision of someone who had been listening carefully and waiting for exactly the right moment to deploy it. He thought about a maintenance worker with a sketch of a repair diagram, about 12,000 people, about 47 statements on a conference room table, about Marcus Del Rey and his 11 years and his daughter in nursing school, and the thing he'd said so simply, without anger or performance, just the plain, honest truth of someone who had waited long enough. "I didn't think anyone was going to come." He thought about a hotel bar on a Thursday night, and a woman with shaking hands who turned out to be fighting for the same things he'd been fighting for his whole career, from the other end of every room he'd ever been excluded from. He thought about all the people who built things, who kept buildings standing and lines running and systems functioning, who filed the reports and submitted the proposals and said the things that needed sayings into spaces that didn't seem to be listening, who kept showing up anyway, because someone had to, because the work mattered regardless of who saw it, because you did not abandon a problem simply because no one had come yet. He thought about what it had taken for someone to finally come. One Thursday night, one hotel bar, one act of paying attention. "Okay," he said, "add the section." Lily grinned, quick and bright, and entirely her own, and reached for the notebook she'd apparently already positioned within arm's reach, which told him this conversation had gone exactly the way she'd planned it. Carol set the chili on the table. The kitchen was warm. Outside, December was doing what December always did, cold and committed, and not asking anyone's permission. And inside, in a house that was not large but was entirely lived in, a man who had spent 12 years being 2 steps behind sat at his kitchen table with his daughter and his sister, and ate chili and talked about permafrost, and was exactly, completely, fully where he was supposed to be. Not because anyone had finally seen him. Because he had finally stopped standing where no one could.